Good evening, everyone. This is the meeting of the Gloucester School Committee. We are meeting at 32 Leslie O. Johnson Road, Gloucester, Massachusetts. It is Wednesday, November 30th, 2022. Consistent with Chapter 107 of the Acts of 2022, this meeting will be conducted by remote participation. The public may not physically attend this meeting, but every effort will be made to allow the public to view and listen to the meeting in real time and participate when necessary. If you are calling in on a phone, you can press *9 to request to speak. If you are watching on a computer or device, there is a raise hand button that you can tap or press to request to speak. Please use either of these options during oral communications to be recognized to speak. I will state that the mission of Gloucester Public Schools is for all students to be successful, engaged, lifelong learners. Please join me in the salute to the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next order of business is oral communications. If there's anybody in attendance that would like to speak to the school committee, now is your opportunity. Okay, seeing none. We will move on to our Gloucester High School Advisory Council, and we have Adriana Martel. And I was going to make a recognition, but I have a feeling maybe it's part of her report. So I'll do that.
Hi, how are you?
Good evening.
So it's not that long of a list, but I'll try to get through it. So the theater program just performed their play last week. It was Clue, and they said it was pretty successful. And then last Wednesday we had our pep rally, and that was a lot of fun right before our Thursday game. The winter sports have started their tryouts this week, and the varsity hockey team has their first scrimmage next Monday at 4 p.m. at the rink. And then Miss Morris, who's like the job developer at the high school, is helping students with IEPs find jobs. Her and Mrs. Lisa Williams are able to sign up for state supports so that the students can use it in the school as well as when they graduate. And then the Monday before elections, our social studies department had some of us take a political survey with the website isidewith.com. It basically gave you like a series of questions, and then from that they calculated which parties each student were most closely towards. And the main importance was that students were able to be more aware of their like civic identity and also make it known that there are more than two political parties. Our school newspaper, the Gillnetter, actually wrote a really good article on that too. And then next Thursday on December 8th, GHS will have its first ever chapter National Art Honor Society in the auditorium. The induction starts at 6:30, and then before that, there's an art show at 6 o'clock. Last night, the yearbook committee had a fundraiser at Lobsterland, and that was really good turnout. I think they raised over like $800 just in raffles. And then our executive board is preparing to do our first blood drive of the year, which is next Friday on December 9th. So far, we have over 50 students signed up, and we're filling up our last spots. Lastly, NHS and Student Council, along with Miss Menery, has raised over 80 baskets for Thanksgiving for families in Gloucester, and that's about it.
Okay. Anybody have any questions for Adriana?
Yeah, so I went to Lobsterland last night. Wasn't aware there was a fundraiser, but it was great while I was there. So, Adriana, do you know if I bought a lighthouse made by the vocational machine shop? Do you know if those are for sale? I put it on the mayor webpage, and people were commenting, asking if they're available. So, just curious.
So, they actually like sold out last night, I think, but they're hoping that the program can make more. Because they were really cool. A lot of people were like asking if they could pre-order next time or something like that. But I'm not sure. I would have to ask the vocational program on that.
I did, I held off on recognitions. I was going to mention and recognize the class of 2022 for the lovely welcoming area with all the seating downstairs in the brightly lit atrium. So people now can have a place to come in and meet up with friends or wait for their parents or friends. It really, I think, is quite a nice way to say, please come and relax. Don't just blow through. So that's very nice. Anybody else have any other recognition? Adriana, thank you for being with us. You can stay, but you don't have to. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Yeah, good night, Laura.
I wanted to recognize the cast and crew and all the advisors of Clue, the musical, or not the musical, but the mystery, and the whodunit on the Gloucester stage. It was fantastic, and I know many of us were there. It was funny. It was clever. It was so involved in its staging and in its presentation, and just an enormous. Clearly a huge group effort from a lot of people and just an outstanding production. So I want to congratulate everyone involved.
Okay, any more? Okay, well, I think the Clue was definitely a big thing to recognize. Enjoyed it tremendously and so. Okay, next item of business is the consent agenda. Does anybody have any items they'd like to remove from the consent agenda? Seeing none?
I move to approve the consent agenda and highlight the Lisa Olson Award, which I think is great, the scholarship.
Second,
Moved and seconded, Maria?
Ms. Weason,
yes.
Chairperson Clancy,
Yes?
Mr. Minio,
Yes.
Ms. Prince,
Yes.
Mayor Verga,
Yes.
and Ms. Watson.
Yes. Okay. Next item of business is deliberations on education issues and superintendent's report. So I will turn it over.
Good evening, everyone. So I want to start off with a few updates and then we'll jump into our presentations. So let me just share. I will say just as I'm opening this up, just about Clue quickly. I thought it was incredibly well acted, including the physical comedy.
Yeah,
Not an easy thing to do for any actor, but certainly our high school actors have it down. So they just did a great job of really taking on their characters and making them think like the characters were alive on things. So, that, as you said, very much a group effort. I also really appreciate how the tech crew is acknowledged, recognized, put out on stage, but it's very well, I believe, from what I've seen over the years, very well integrated. Both groups are working together. They know it's a team effort. That isn't always the case in high school production, very honestly. So I love that we recognize and honor, and our students recognize and honor the important role of the tech group. So certainly, of course, can't do it without that. So anyway, thank you for mentioning it. So as we always say, every day matters in Gloucester Public Schools, and which I again, every day matters in the Gloucester Public Schools, and everybody belongs. Want to always make sure all our students and our staff know that they belong here with us. We're all working together and learning deeply and getting ready for their and help building their lives. So just a few updates, and then we'll do an MCAS update and a professional development update from grades 9 to 12. So Principal James Cook is here, and also Amy Pasquarello will help with that, like we did 3 through 8 a couple weeks ago. And then we will also have the youth risk behavior survey presentation. Gloucester Health Department Director Mary Ellen Rose is with us. Also, their prevention director. Thank you. Chelsea Goldstein will be here as well. So get to them in a bit. But first, some updates. So committee members, I gave to you just at this time of year. We have a lot of events in our schools, and just want to make sure you have the list and aware of at least across all our schools, holiday concerts, holiday shops, pajama days, band performances. Also, our English learner family winter event at the high school. These are really just awareness. They're typically family at school events, not public events, but want to make sure that you are aware of this. just the great things that are happening at this time of year in our schools. So that's that, you have that with you. Also want to point out a few things that just in terms of student learning. I was at West Parish School today. What you see here is Carrie Muller's third grade classroom at West Parish. Notice a couple of things. One, there's sort of mood lighting on the left-hand side. It's purposely, not just the bright lights in there, but a little dimmer, so kids have a quiet space to read. They're reading in small groups, a novel that they're reading. But you'll also notice that there are a lot of empty desks. There are two primary reasons for that, or one primary reason, one sort of secondary reason. At this point in the what I need block at our elementary schools, that's typically when we're regrouping students for what they need based on their learning profile or their learning or their progress so far. And we're able to, and West Parish is a good example of this, able to divide kids into different groups, both in their classrooms. So there are 3 grade 3 classrooms at West Parish, but also into other small group learning rooms where they might be working with a paraprofessional or special educator. But so you have, maybe in this, there are probably 15 students here, but the other folks might be working in a separate area with just 3 or 4 students. And then other students might be in a different class working on something similar. In this case, they're all reading and working on literacy across those rooms, but a little different way depending on where they are and how they're doing. So the other piece, the reason also you see that not every chair is taken, every desk is taken there is because these 3 students, they're actually in the back of the left-hand photo, but they're got a space to the side where they're reading together their book. 2 on a soft seating and 1 comfortable on the floor. So just an example of how we make sure, just a glimpse into one of our schools today. But this is the sort of thing that happens every day in our elementary schools where kids are working in smaller groups, getting what they need based on what they're learning and how they're progressing and what they need to challenge or support. And then this was this evening at Cape Ann Museum, our K-2 literacy event, hosted in collaboration with Cape Ann Museum. This is, we're supporting our families with books and literacy approaches and content, and making books developed through our Title I grant. So a nice partnership with Cape Ann Museum and a great turnout. I think it's 20 or so kids, K-2 kids. Most folks who are living downtown, I think, just because of proximity, but it's a nice turnout. Where I think those before
We did pre-COVID, we had play at City Hall.
great.
So we're bringing it back.
Excellent. Cape Ann it continues to be a great partner with us. Over the summertime was the Walker Hancock statue, the Walker Hancock inspired statues that Cape Ann staff did with our middle school students. So just great to have Cape Ann working with us, Cape Ann Museum working with us. And then another piece here, really important that we highlight the Gloucester Public Schools, the great work that's happening in our schools, not only locally, but also statewide, regionally and statewide. So one example of that was the Department of Education invited our schools to present at their statewide conference on dropout prevention and re-engagement. The topic was successful strategies for moving forward, and they came to us, asked us to present on the work we're doing on our multi-tiered system to support students with social emotional learning skills and mental health. This is all, and so what Amy Cam represented us with about at a conference of hundreds of people, and her breakout group was filled, not surprisingly. And she gave sort of captured and then communicated about priority 3 on our plan for ongoing improvement. And it's all these areas: social emotional learning, skill development, identification and intervention, strengthening expertise and skills of all school-based clinical staff, and utilizing community partnerships for that 3rd tier to provide intensive student support. She probably spoke as fast as I do, but I'm confident she was more engaging and personal than I'll ever be. But it sounds like it was a big success and brought, and then lots of questions for Amy, lots of engagement, lots of people wanted to learn more. Just an example of us getting our good work out there more widely. Anything you want to add to that, Ms. Cam?
No.
Did a fantastic job. And we really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
I think it was good. It was.
And Amy really is representing all of, her leadership obviously on this, but also all the staff, our clinical staff and staff across the school that are doing so much work. So
How did Gloucester get picked?
Because they were impressed with a grant that I wrote and said that we had promising practices that they wanted us to share with other districts.
So the focus was on engagement and dropout prevention. So we have the RAISE program, engaging all youth school, that I developed and had and engaged community partners. So they were really interested in that program. They were interested in our attendance policy revamp and our relational proactive approach and how we change policy and practice to keep students in, not push them out. So but they liked the multi-tiered approach, so I kind of looked at the foundational pieces and then tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And yeah, they reached out to me. It was a big honor. Yeah.
And they've seen the by us applying for grants and Amy leading that, they see it, they started to see the different pieces that are lining up. That's why we reached out. It's not just one.
We should have recognized you today.
Yeah, that's all right.
Hi.
You all slide.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, for that. And then another, just to remind folks, Lynn Lyons is coming to Gloucester. And as I said to families in my Thanksgiving message, I guess the week before last, just really probably one of the most important workshops, forums, events we'll do on parenting in these times. Just really hope we have a good turnout. Lynn Lyons has been working with our schools and staff and critical staff on a very regular basis over the past year plus, and really sort of helping them develop expertise. And she's going to share that expertise about how to raise students in our anxiety-reducing times, help anxious kids, anxious parents. The thing I've learned is if you have anxious kids, it could be that you have anxious parents as well. That's what happened in my family. I can't tell you who the anxious one was. But anyway, just great concrete strategies for parents and families, and also kids, students of 13 or older are invited to join us. We'll have seats for the school committee there reserved, and for this, so folks come up for that. So just a few updates. Now I'll hand it off. I'll stop sharing. I'll hand it off to Amy Pasquarello and James Cook.
Permission to share.
Amy, have permission to share?
So the last time we were here, I presented the MCAS data for grades 3 through 8. So now we get to focus on the high school. James is here for any questions if we have them. So going forward, some of the slides look similar, and but we talked about this last time that bringing back MCAS in 22 is coming back out of COVID. For the elementary and middle school, we talked about it's the first time they had a full test. For the high school, I want to point out that this is the first year that the 10th graders last spring took an MCAS for ELA and math since the 7th grade because of COVID. So they're really coming back from the pandemic. So it's nice that we're back, but there has been a large gap. So as you're going to see, we're kind of restarting our goals here, right? So this is similar to what I said last time, statewide data. I want to point out we're seeing across the state that math scores are improving slightly. ELA continues to be a concern across the state. Science scores have increased slightly, but when we compare ourselves to pre-pandemic, we're not back yet. We're starting to come back in areas. I talked about the story of coming out of COVID, and we're going to talk about the high school story of that tonight. Student absenteeism continues to be an issue that we will focus on for several years to get back to where we need to be. So this slide is on the left-hand side where we see Gloucester's schools, and on the right is the state. And this focuses just on ELA. We are below the state at 45% of our students are meeting or exceeding expectations, where the state is at 58. So the blue is exceeding. So we want the blue to be higher. The green is meeting. We also want that to be high. The orange or red is partially meeting, and the the orange or yellow, and the red is not meeting, excuse me. Okay, so we want the first two columns to be higher than the second two. That's our goal. Okay, we also noted last time, one of you asked, to meet the state goal is not necessarily our goal. We would like to be above, but for now we're comparing because we're having this reset. Okay. So this is a similar graph, but we're focusing in on math, where we are at 41% are meeting or exceeding, where 50% savings. Okay, we're going to get deeper into this as we go forward. And for science, we are at 38%, where the state is 47%. Okay. What I think is a little more valuable for us to look at is our data over through the pandemic. So pre-pandemic 2019, if we look at that data through 22. So this is breaking down. We see the blue is ours exceeds, green is meeting, orange is partially, and red is not meeting at all. It does appear that we have our higher scores in 21 last year, but I want to also draw your attention to our participation rates. So this year we had 98% participating. That's wonderful. The last year where our numbers were slightly up, you'll notice our participation rate was only 83. So that was during COVID. Pre-K through 8 was allowed to take MCAS at home, but because it's a graduation requirement, high schoolers had to come in to take it. So several high schoolers chose not to. They were going to school remotely. They were not feeling safe to come in, or for whatever reason, because it was going through COVID. So our participation rate was low. That can affect the numbers that for last year. So it's hard to compare our numbers this year to last. Okay. And this is for math. You can see our progression. You'll notice again, we're back up to 97% participation rate, whereas last year we were only at 82. So we've got them back in the school, and now we're going to bring the scores up, right? So that's the first step. And this is for science. Participation rate was not available. The science is the first year that they've done the next gen, so it's a slightly different test. Okay. So looking at year to year is good information to have, and we use it to base instruction, but we're judging, or we're looking at different cohorts of students year to year. So it's hard to really go deep, dive deep and see where they are. So what we like to focus on is student growth, because that's looking at a student over time and not comparing apples to oranges. Okay. So I want to remind you about student growth percentile, right? The state generally says they want 40 to 60% is typical growth. We're looking to fill achievement gaps and to come out of the pandemic. So we want higher than 40 to 50%. We would want closer to 60%. So we're looking for more growth, okay? So if we look here in 2019, it's very small, I apologize, but all students, their SGP, student growth percentile, was 48 for in ELA in the high school. We are at 40 now, so we're just meeting that typical growth. For our subgroups, which the state reports on, for students with high needs, low income, EL, and students with disabilities, we're below the 40%. That's a concern. We need to be higher in our student growth, particularly in those areas. So that's where we are, and we're at 39.9 for white at the bottom. Okay. For math, we're looking a little better. Our student growth percentile is at 50% for all students. So that is better. We're right where we want to be on a typical year coming out of the pandemic. We want to be higher because we have more growth to develop. Our subgroups are lower, but they're not drastically lower than overall. And that's a good sign, because that means we're bringing all students with us, right? But again, we do want that student growth to get higher over time. And so Principal Cook and I talked a lot about this piece of data, which I found very interesting. It's the advanced coursework. So this slide looks at advanced coursework, and Principal Cook is going to correct me if I misspeak on it. but I believe this is focusing on grades 11 and 12. So this is students who took advanced coursework completion. And if you notice, in 21, we had 34.8, and we are higher at 41.5. So we are having more students take higher level courses, which that's a really good thing. That's a celebration. Let's see what else. That's all I have. So the next one, this one is looking at individual AP exams that we took. And I want to focus in on a couple. So if we look at English language composition, we had 19 students take the exam and the average score was a 3.9. So for those of you who aren't familiar with AP scores, it's a scale from 1 to 5. If you get most colleges at a score of 3 considers giving you some college credit. Some colleges have different scales depending on the college, but 3 is a typical score you want to get possible college credit. 5 would be the highest. So 3.9 is great, and 89% of our students scored that. If we look at our English Lit, 100% of our students scored above a 3, and our average was a 4.3. So we were really strong in that. That's very good. Our next one I want to point out is our physics. It was only one person, but they represented us really well. They brought up 4. So we were 100% over a 3. That's a good thing. Our world history, we had 6 students get it. A 4.7 was the average score. Remember, 5 is the highest score. That's really outstanding. 100% scored a 3 or higher. So that's really impressive. And that led us to dive a little deeper into some of the other scores. So if you look at our calculus score, the average score is a 2. So that was not our best work there. But US history, we had 38 students take the test. Our average score was a 2, and so for 26% scored a 3 or above. What's that?
Oh, sorry, Amy was asking a question.
But I want to point out about US history. So we have 10th graders, 2 full classes, I believe 40 students taking US history in 10th grade, which typically AP courses are 11th and 12th grade. So it's very encouraging that we have students taking higher level courses at an earlier age, but this score indicates that makes us wonder, are we giving them the prerequisite skills to be successful in that course? So this data is really helping drive some planning at the high school to make sure that our honors courses are pushing students to have that higher level thinking, the ability to compare multiple texts and synthesize all that information so that they'll be ready for higher level courses. Typically, students who take world history have US history first. So those that are successful and move on, we're clearly doing well because they're scoring 4.7, right? So we have a little work to do. We're getting more participating. Now we're going to raise the bar so more are also successful. Does that make sense? Some more information about our AP scores. If we were to look at 2019, our pre-COVID, our total AP students, we had 98 of them. We are up to 124. So again, we have more students challenging themselves to take those higher level courses, and we want that. The number of exams, we had 170 in 2019, and we're up to 186. So we're really increasing that. That's excellent.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So is that 124 individual students, even if they're taking
It's-
multiple AP?
Yes,
exams?
those are the students. Yep. So the number of exams is 184. So 184 exams were taken by 124 students. And if you look at AP students with a score, so I want to compare these bottom ones. So the total percentage of students with 3 or over in 2019 was 62.24. We're only at 46.7, but remember, with more students taking them. If you look at the actual number of students that are scoring above a 3, we went from 61 to 58. So we're showing some recovery in that area. Okay. So our participation numbers are up. The number of students scoring 3 or above is back to where it was, but the percentage we want to raise. And we've also added a brand new AP course in comparative government and politics, and there are over 60 students, 66, I believe, who are taking that. So we are continuing to challenge our students, which is excellent.
What grades are those students typically in?
Those are typically 11th graders, but this year, because some seniors missed it, right? We have some seniors which might have something to do with a little bit larger than it might be next year, but it is a very popular course, and it's exciting to see another pathway for kids interested in history and social studies. And will help with these numbers, because one of the things we say often is the score is one thing, right? Do you score 3 or higher? What's called the qualifying score is 3 or higher. But also by taking the most rigorous course there is available, they're much more prepared for post-secondary success because they've done college work in high school, right? And so if they're successful here, the score is one way of measuring, but then what do they do during the course? So for example, these tests don't measure how well they do on, say, the kinds of research papers you have to do in college, right? So you can't test that. But these students are all doing that at a very high level. They're doing that kind of work at a college level. They're doing group presentations at a college level. So every person you see here is another student who's extremely well prepared for college. And a lot of the feedback we get is, even if I'm a science or engineering major, or I'm a biostatistics major, because I took that AP, that English or that history class, I learned how to write, and I'm also doing well in my humanities classes.
Yes.
I just want to sort of ask a little bit about, so obviously it's great that more kids are taking advanced classes, and based on what you said before, it's like, are they prepared, especially in this moment of rebuilding? I guess it's more of a question for James. Do you find that the 10th graders, the students who are, a little younger, maybe a little bit less prepared, is this encouraging them or discouraging?
That's a great question. That's something we talked about. Amy touched on it briefly, but I can say a little bit more. So that our history department is reevaluating, and there's a bit of a mix of both. Sometimes it really bolsters their confidence to go on and take AP courses across the board their junior year because they know what it's like. And the particular teacher, the other Mr. Cook, right, Mr. Phil Cook, who teaches that course, does it knowing that they come in essentially as 9th graders and they leave as college students, right? Like that's what he's trying to do. So it's taught differently than a junior or senior AP class, right? It's a nurturing kind of environment. But what we're doing right now, because this come January, we'll be creating the new program of studies for next year. We're considering, that department, the history department, we're looking at some more intentional pre-AP activities, which generally is more reading, writing, and critical thinking than historical fact memorization, right? Those are the kinds of skills that they're looking for in the AP test. And everyone's looking for them, right? Those are transferable skills across the board in any discipline. So we'll probably be making some changes to the preparation and what the preparation looks like, and have different pathways. So for some students, they're ready sophomore year, they're taking the AP test. And for other students, that sophomore year is a pre-AP year so that they can be more successful as juniors and seniors. So great, thank you. That teed it right up for the things that we've been thinking about.
Curious about the interest, over the student body, with different demographics, like students that are, say, in the vocational departments, or any any of those students interested in that, in the AP?
Yes, it's actually a feature of one of the things we try to promote to parents along the way is that the AP pathway is completely compatible with how we do scheduling. Because we do scheduling the particular way we do, students can do the AP courses or other high-level courses too.
Yeah.
Because the state, unfortunately, only categorizes, for our purposes, AP courses as advanced courses, but we also have advanced courses, say, in engineering, for which there isn't an AP test, or in the arts, right? Advanced studio art, there's no AP. Well, there is, but it's different from the kind of work that our students are doing. It's a more academic bent, but they're doing high-level work, and they could be in a vocational program as well and doing
year 4 of a vocational program certainly is high level advanced work also on its own. And they can be doing it in an academic area.
All right, so absenteeism, I explained last time how last year they went, chronic absenteeism is missing 10% or more, and they changed it this year to 20%. So it's really comparing apples to oranges. So I do want to acknowledge that across the state, the data shows that average students missed 11 days in 2021 and 15 in 2022. 18% of all students missed 18 or more days in 2021, and 28% missed 18 or more days in 2022. So absenteeism is definitely a focus. And it is excellent that Gloucester is doing work like the attendance policy and writing grants and being recognized for the wonderful work we're doing. So we're hoping to make some progress in turning that around. Chronic absenteeism for students in 3 through 8 has increased, and 1.7 million days of missed school because of positive COVID testings in 2022. So just to remind you that we are well aware that this is an issue, and we are very much targeting. Okay. So some takeaways about the high school data is achievement gaps have remained consistent with the state, which is okay, but we want our student growth percentiles to come up. So we are closing those gaps and coming back out of the pandemic stronger. Our AP course is a focus of celebration. The participation is up, and we are working to add some prerequisite skills, as Principal Cook talked about, to have students even more successful. And then absenteeism is a huge focus across the district, and we'll be working on that. And you can see all of those are directly connected to our plan for ongoing improvement. So everything is tied in and purposeful to raise the bar. Yes.
Kind of a comment and a question. When some of us went to the school committee conference in Hyannis a few weeks back, and there were some guest speakers, and one of the consistent messages were that, our students are coming back from a pandemic, and that pandemic had a huge impact on their life, not just school, but at home. Issues going on with the families at home, the extra stresses that are going on with financial, working, not working, and that our kids are under a lot of pressure right now as a result of that experience, and that the effects of COVID are by no means over, for even if we're not out of school having COVID. And the message was, right now is a good time to pause, not add a lot of extra stress to the kids and let them just come back and settle in. And I'm hearing tonight where we have work to do. So I'm curious to know the thoughts of the district, and this might not be a conversation for now, but down the road, of how aggressive is that approach going to be when we see these types of results? Are we going to just dive in and say, okay, we're going to get back to work and we got to get better and do that? Or is there a chance for the kids to come back, get acclimated, that the families get a little bit more acclimated to? Where I work, I can see the impact of COVID is far from over, and I think we're actually in a worse spot this year than we were last year. So I'm just curious to know at some point from the district how they're going to move forward, knowing that we need to get better, but we also need to do it in a gentle way right now, so that our kids aren't overwhelmed and causing more.
So I think that's a great.
No, that's you.
I think that's a great point. And if you look at the entirety of our plan for ongoing improvement, our number one goal is belonging, to make students feel comfortable and supported, and to bring in all of the RTI or the MTSS, those multi-tiered supports, not only in math and in science and English, but in social emotional. And that's the work that Amy Cam is doing. So we are working very hard to give those supports, bringing in professionals like consultants like Lynn Lyons and those kind of things to really make our students and our families feel connected and that they belong. The priority 2 of blending general ed and special ed. So how can we support kids? We're going to raise the bar and want our students to achieve, but we're not gonna just raise the bar and say, good luck. We're gonna build those prerequisite skills. We're going to collaborate with special education to put in those supports. We're gonna have some multi-tiered supports too, so we can do it. So yes, we do need to pause, we do need to have a reset, but we do still need to lift ourselves up.
I'm not sure pausing, but I want to have.
Yeah, I was gonna say that because that's
Pausing.
exactly what I was.
Reset.
Yeah, the reset, because I think one of the things that I want to speak to is social emotional learning. Because in the focus on actually building those skills in every classroom, right? So it's skills that have to do with self-awareness and self-management, skills that have to do with making good choices, relationship building, and then social awareness, right? Like we can, in an academic environment, we're helping students really understand what they're going through. And then understand how their choices in this and other people's choices affect them and how theirs affect others, and making choices and the pause is so we can actually name and say and teach those things, even at the high school level, that we might think of as being more like elementary kinds of things, but we know we need those things in our high school classrooms. And so a lot of the professional developments that we're doing, hear about that later, has, there's a teaching and learning component that is always hand in hand with the social emotional learning component. And social emotional learning isn't just about, it's part of it is caring about kids. And then the other part is helping the students develop the skills so they're empowered in this really challenging time. So being intentional about that, will help them, we believe, in their lives outside of school and also in the academic areas for growth. If we ignore the social emotional skills, we're going to see no growth in our academic side of things. Right? So I think that's how we, and luckily we were already working on that before COVID, right? That was already a priority. Thank goodness, right? Because then we could keep building and keep strengthening and lean in on some of that. That the leadership that we've had has really helped us get to a place now and support it, because we really need it. Like you're saying, what you're saying is what we're seeing too.
So the only thing I add on that just quickly is that it's about paying attention to where students are, where families are, and responding as such. So it doesn't mean it's a bullheaded approach to just doing what we normally did. Okay, but as both Amy and James have well described, we have to adjust that so kids not only can continue to learn, because that doesn't, their high school careers don't pause, right? So we have to help them keep learning, but we have to pay attention to what's going to help them. I think, as James said, we're doing some things now, I think, with Amy Camp's leadership and our clinical staff and our adjustment counselors, that if we didn't have those people in place to begin with, like the school committee did, then we would be really scrambling. We're working hard, we're learning, we're adjusting, but it's more about paying attention to than responding.
So we're a little bit ahead of the game.
Why?
As far as having the
Jesse and
support
others,
system, not
yeah.
necessarily with the kids, but like I said, we had started those conversations and put support in place.
Yeah.
Before this happened, and now we have that foundation now, and now we can use the good work of it.
Right, and I never want to communicate. I don't even want to communicate away like yeah, we've got a wire. We're all good, right?
No,
Because
no,
that's
okay.
right. And then, but I think we're in a good position. I think we're doing well. And the other piece is the state's primary indicator in terms of one standardized test, MCAS, shows we have some more work to do. I would say we're doing some good progress on sort of the higher end, those advanced work, but we have to think of all students. There's no work to do, so that might be a good.
It's a really good leeway. I just want to
I just want to make another comment, because we went through grades 3 through 8 and this, but that last school year, not just kids being absent for COVID, it had a lot of teachers being absent. So I think we need to remember that was not a typical delivery of instruction. As best as everybody tried, we couldn't get subs, and I'm sure there was content, there was rigor, there were a lot of things that were not what optimally a teacher would want, and they get sick too. And that was a year of You know, we haven't seen any attendance data for teachers on that, but I can only imagine that that was definitely pretty high year for absenteeism during the COVID.
So that segues us right into what we're doing for professional development at the high school. So just a reminder of our plan for ongoing improvement. Priority 1, to deepen belonging and engagement with students with the school. 2, to strengthen that connection between general education and special education. 3, we want to have that social emotional support for students. So that's excellent that it's right in there. And 4, to strengthen our educational process. Okay. And similar to the last one on when we get into the meat of it, there'll be a little indicator of how each task is addressing the plan for ongoing improvement. But I first want to point out that so Gloucester High School has the sustainable improvement focus areas, and they have basically 2. They've James is referring to as like 2 buckets. Like what they're doing, they want to keep. How does it fill one of those buckets, or sometimes both? So their first bucket or focus is the brain-based culturally responsive instructional practices. And we'll get into that a little bit coming forward, but that really addresses both district priorities 1 and 2. And then the social emotional learning in areas of self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. That talks about the belonging and also the social emotions. So priorities 1 and 3. Priority 4 is not being missed at the high school, but that's more strengthening special education process, and it's not throughout the entire school. So that's why it's something. So brain-based culturally responsive teaching, they are continuing the implementation of this professional development through PLC work, professional learning community work, and peer and evaluator feedback. And what this is they are applying awareness and knowledge of the brain and culture to relationships to lessons. So students don't learn best with the 45-minute lecture or an hour lecture. I mean, I don't learn well that way. They need to break it up and to really digest it. We are looking to foster relationships that create learning partnerships and fully implement the Ignite, Chunk, Chew, Review lesson model to promote meaningful thinking and academic independence. And I'm going to explain that in a minute. Right here, actually. So to Ignite, the goal is to get a student's attention, right? So not just to do like a practice problem and then start. This is get the students interested, intrigue them, get them wondering, have them have some inquiry or questioning about a problem, maybe have them explore or experiment. It's really to get their attention, not just pay attention, look at me, but get their brains going and ignite their thinking. Then we are looking to chunk material in smaller pieces that can be digest and really dived into. For a teenage brain, for culturally responsive brain, from my brain, to have a smaller chunk to really dive in and understand it. And then the real learning or the actively processing to chew it. So you think of, they have to think about what they're talking about and they have to work with it. They have to maybe have some productive struggle. They have to question, they have to run a lab, they have to do whatever to really understand it. And then always to review and to sum it up and to come back to it. Should I come close?
That was good.
All right.
Great. I love it.
This a couple of years ago.
Yes, yeah. Like all the sugar and mixed with stuff.
It's like I have you queued with the questions. So next, the questions you're going to see is that James brought this to the high school prior to the pandemic. In 2019, they started looking at brain-based culturally responsive teaching and the instructional model and applying it throughout all of the lessons at the high school. In 2021, 20 to 22, so 2 years, there was a professional development focused on creating lessons or parts of lessons. So they first learned about this brain-based learning, then they practiced putting them into lessons through a pandemic, I might add, which is pretty outstanding. And this year, the focus is to take what they've learned and implement that throughout the school. And they're having, it's in every subject, every grade level, and they are opening it up to a consultancy protocol where, let's say, an English teacher brings in his or her lesson plan, 2 peers cross-curricular peers. So there's a math teacher there, there's a science teacher there, there's a gym teacher there, listening to the lesson to give feedback. And that's just courageous in and of itself, of the teachers to be able to open up and do that. And the idea of having the cross-curricular is if you are an English teacher who likes words and likes to talk and likes to theorize, you better have a pretty good igniter to get the gym teacher to listen. So their feedback is really good, right? So that cross-curricular is very valuable. On November 8th, and we get into this in a minute, but on November 8th, they had 20 teachers present a lesson for feedback cross-curricular, which is amazing.
With 20 small groups.
20 small groups, yeah, all in small groups. And we are also adding in the layer of having some a consultant talk to the administrators on how to give feedback to improve this practice and really implement. So you can see in the timeline where it was introduced, and throughout a pandemic, it was not lost and it was built upon, and this year it's coming to fruition. So it's pretty great to see.
Just on this, when you've heard me say a lot, how many schools that 8 years or so have been working on a very systematic approach of curriculum review, instructional practices, database processes, intervention, and that sort of thing. And then you've also heard me say the high school has been working on this for years as well, and now the middle school begin. This is what I mean by the high school has been working on this for years in terms of instruction, curriculum, and literally, as Amy pointed out, which is through the pandemic, keep sustaining that work. You can go as fast or as deep as I think Principal Cook and his leadership team wanted, but they kept with it. And that's remarkable, and it's also very, very important work, especially now where we're getting out of high school. I mean, unlike high schools in general are a little more close to the vest in terms of sharing practice. Okay, a little more guarded on that. It exists here at Gloucester too. No harm, no foul. That the culture of these places is built. Okay, so the fact that James and his team and his teachers are engaging this way, it's a great thing for them. It's a really great practice that isn't as common as we think it might be.
My battery's at 7% and that outlet doesn't work, but I'm gonna keep going. Okay. So. All right, so on November 8th, this is, it summed up the high school's 2 buckets. So on November 8th, they did that consultancy protocol for culturally responsive teaching with their 20 teachers. By the way, they're not giving up on that. They're continuing it for the rest of the year through PD, through PD and during staff meetings and throughout the rest of the year. So every teacher will have an opportunity to have a lesson and to present it and get feedback from their peers. The other bucket, that social emotional learning bucket, the afternoon they had Lynn Lyons come and talked about managing and preventing anxiety and depression in the classroom. So those 2 goals were summed up in one day, and that's their goals throughout the year. So it's kind of nice to have that tied in. So going into increasing social emotional learning, they are going to continue the implementation of social emotional learning through school growth teams, mental health ambassador teams, and mental health and social emotional learning steering committee. They are piloting social emotional learning activities for students in homeroom and in other classes. They're implementing wellness strategies from this year's PD, from trauma-informed practice. And they are planning and delivering advanced professional development for teachers and staff related to social emotional learning and mental health wellness. So that's some of the work with Lynn Lyons and those kind of things. Okay. So this slide is actually the same because this is across all schools, but I want to sum it up the same as my last presentation. That for social emotional learning, our focus is on Lynn Lyons, her managing for anxiety throughout for students. Trails, we are piloting and starting to implement throughout K through 12, through mostly our adjustment counselors. We have project adventures at 3 levels. We had a STAG, so it's a threat assessment training for administrators and clinical staff on how to make sure our students at risk have the supports that they need. And we have a partnership for youth
across the, with SEL online and in-person trainings throughout the year. In literacy, I want to take you through the life of a Gloucester student. We are working on implementing foundations across the school, so every student has that with geos and wit and wisdom and have a really strong foundation. At O'Malley, we are working on an ELA pilot to bring that instruction to have it more equitable across the board and to raise the bar there. And both at O'Malley and at the high school, we are talking about cross-curricular literacy so that literacy is not just in the English classroom, but the science teachers are teaching note-taking skills, and the social studies teachers are taking multiple texts and bringing it together and synthesizing it and doing some wonderful things. So bringing literacy throughout all subjects at the high school and O'Malley. So that's just the strain of literacy throughout. And then for special education, that one bucket that I said wasn't there, we are not ignoring it, that priority number 4. We are working with our special educators on improving their diagnostic assessments, their IEP development, goal writing, progress monitoring, and all of those things. Okay? And I made it to the end without my computer dying. So I'll take any questions.
Any questions?
Can you define culturally responsive? The term culturally responsive?
James,
I can do that.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So culture responsive teaching is in our particular form of it is a brain-based culture responsive teaching. And what that means is that, you know, there are things first of all, we start with, there are things we know about the teenage brain, right? Things like the length of the attention span, right? So we talked about a digestible chunk. So what that really means is 12 to 15 minutes on any one thing, right? So that's the brain-based part. And then the culturally responsive part of that is that we are being mindful of the diverse cultures that our students have at home and in their heritage, the diverse cultures throughout our student body in terms of race, ethnicity, genders, sexuality, and so on, that we are being mindful of who we have in front of us. And so our content, that igniting part, is speaking to the students where they are, right? So we, in terms of being welcoming as a school and being diverse as a school, we're making sure that the readings that we have are also diverse. We're making sure that the representation in a math textbook and in a history textbook reflects the diversity of our students, right? So we're not alienating our students through a more homogeneous presentation of curriculum to them. So we've got, so to be mindful of both the brain-based part of it and the brain-based on that, and the complexity of, in a heterogeneous school like ours, the complexity of the students and meeting them where they are and communicating, being responsive to them culturally, instead of being separate, austere, academically at a remove from our students.
So you're inserting culture into the curriculum.
Well, the curriculum is cultural always, by default. Any curriculum is by default is cultural, right?
And not academic, but I don't know, like I'm trying to, differentiate between like the academic portion and what cultural responsive.
Can I try to?
Yeah.
So even things like using terms that might be familiar to certain students because of their background versus others that may have a different background. So something that's very commonly used in a particular group of people, and then we have students who moved here from other places. You need to ignite those students with something familiar to them as well. Is that how?
Yeah, that's part of it.
I mean, that's probably like a real low level.
Well, what you're mentioning actually is something that could be framed around sheltered English immersion, vocabulary instruction, for example, right? Where you would, before a lesson, you would say, okay, here's some terms that are in this unit that students may not be familiar with. So instead of assuming understanding for, say, a SLIFE student, a student with disruption in their education, right? We're going to teach those up front. Right? And there's a whole practice that all of us have had to do, the sheltered, even administrators, I'd have to do the sheltered English immersion course. So all our teachers are trained in, say, this 7-step vocabulary process for introducing terms. So all of our students are welcomed into the lesson and all on the same level. So that's an example. And it's bridging, as you heard what I said, it's bridging students where they are and inviting them into an academic discourse, right? It's not saying like, we're not going to stay in the things that are, just students are already familiar with, but it's a way into an academic discourse. We call it academic vocabulary, right? That might be, that when I speak like this, I tend to use a lot of academic vocabulary and speak in an academic way, but if, of course, I just see me hang out with my brothers a bit, speak differently, and I have to learn this somehow along the way. I'm a first generation college student myself, right? And I had to learn to do what I do now. It's very important to me, I get emotional about this, it's very important to me to provide the same entry points and the same bridges to all the students at Gloucester High School.
It's a great question, because it's not easy to define or acknowledge, or not define or then explain and then also teach, right? I'm going to attempt a very simplistic approach on this, okay? So my background, I really, really love sports, okay? I'm a sports fan at many levels, okay? If I was teaching an English class or a math class or a science class, and all my examples were about sports, athletics, I'm going to connect really well with some students, okay? But all the other students are going to check out, okay? They're not going to be hard for them to learn from me. It's going to be hard for me to connect with them. It's going to be hard for them to get my lessons. So if I talk about athletics and examples, okay, say of science, okay, athletics and performance arts, and I talk about other countries, I bring in, because I know students are from other countries. So if my examples or my texts have that range, then I'm not setting up barriers that automatically have students check out. I'm making it much more likely that all my students will engage in the lessons and learning, not just because I'm the teacher standing there telling them things, because I'm aware enough to know who my students are and are using examples, language, methodologies that connect with the way they do things. Okay. Another version of that is if I only teach by telling people things, by standing up and talking, there are going to be students, some of us may learn well from lectures. Okay. But if I know my students well enough, I actually understand that some learn through visually. Some learn by learning on their own, some learn well by talking in small groups. Okay, if I'm only using one approach, I'm not being responsive to my students' needs and who they are. So I've got to vary the content, vary the examples, vary the teaching approaches, and those pieces are being responsive to the culture and backgrounds, histories of our students.
It sounds like a multifaceted approach, a lot of juggling and balancing.
It is not simple.
Yeah, it doesn't say, it sounds pretty.
Yeah. And it's not simple because our students, they're multifaceted.
Learning's not-
What's that?
Learning's not.
Learning is simple, right? Exactly, right.
And didn't we used to call this differentiation to an extent, that was the buzzword 10, 15 years ago, the
Yeah.
teachers had to know that each individual student had to grab their attention and
Yeah.
teaching at all the different
Yes,
levels.
yes and no.
Kind of in a way.
Yeah, no, right. It's sort of an earlier version in a sense, right? Because differentiation and knowledge that was mostly on learning styles.
Right,
Okay, this is learning styles and
with
Right.
more
Yeah.
knowing the student.
Does that help?
We have questions.
It's not
And
simple.
to speak back to how we get from complexity back to a simple framework, that's where the ignite, chunk, chew, and review comes in. It's a simple, easily remembered structure where, okay, what do I need to do? I need to ignite, I just start the lesson, how am I going to ignite them today? And now, like Ben did, I'm going to think about who are the students in front of me and what kind of igniting activity will reach my students. And then I'm thinking, okay, now I need to chunk that material. And I need, and so the material may have, a couple different readings, right? Or it might be reading aloud as well as reading silently, watching a video. So that's multiple modes. And then how are we going to process it? I know some of my students are going to really want to dig in on their own quietly at their desk, but I know others of my students really are social. They need to play this out with their peers. So I'm using a very simple design to give some structure to the complexity. Does that make sense? Right. And that's why that is so important. Because otherwise there are too many variables. Yeah.
It's more of a comment, but I think there's almost something missing, like the buzzword before ignite that's missing that I think staff do. that's culturally responsive and brain-based, right? That is relationship building and it's learning who's in your classroom, what their needs are, right? Like before you ignite, you have to recognize where people are at. And so it's just like, it's essentially meeting people where they're at globally, but also on a day-to-day basis, right? Like if you notice like a kid is really having a tough day, you're gonna ignite that kid in a very different way than you are the rest of the class. And so I think that's really, it's a way of relationship building and connecting with people personally so that they can actually access the curriculum, what is being taught. I think we're sort of missing something for you.
Yeah, you would love Zaretta Hammond's work because that's actually the Ignite review is just describing what happens right now. It's a lesson design, right? But relationship building and then using relationships to build a learning partnership, right? And a learning partnership is like, why do you care about learning, right? Why does the student care to engage in my class? That's where you build a partnership with the student, with the family about what does your success look like in my room. And so it's all of that. That's a big part of the other PD that we've done and continue to do is we've had outside folks as well as experts from within the school talk about how to build relationships where we can then become warm demanders, is the phrase we use, right? I care deeply about you and you know that. And because of that, I can ask you to do a little more. I can ask you to sit with the complex problem solving, do some productive struggle. I'm a trusted adult. You'll talk to me when you're having a difficult time so I can get you connected. You're exactly right. That Ignite Juncture Review sits within, is totally surrounded by relationship building.
And I think a couple things is just like some folks are really better at igniting or chunking or chewing. Some like those parts of that lesson content, some are better at relationship building than others.
Yeah.
So as James said, that's another thing, and I just also acknowledge that. It's not like everyone just develops relationships with people or with high school students or middle school students like this, So that's also, as James said, that's work that we've often in schools expected, but not been explicit about.
Yeah.
Or not explicit in the sense of even like developing like how to do that. So that's one piece. But the other piece is all of that James is describing and the approaches around culturally brain-based culture responsive teaching. It's in order for kids to learn more deeply and effectively. That's the whole point. Okay. Yes, they're connected to schools. Yes, they trust their teachers. All good things, right? But you're doing that in order, as we talk about, but we're not talking in public, to build their intellectual capacity. Okay, intellectual capacity, right? That's the point. It isn't just to have a good time in school. We want them to have a good time in school. We want them to learn.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry, I ended up in the corner.
Thank you, James, for leading all this work and being the singular leader, but also you have a whole team and teams is something we work with, but it's the right work. And I think one last thing on this is, we could raise test scores by just strategies and just rote drilling. Okay, we could do that. We're not interested in doing that actually, because we want to prepare our students for their life beyond high school, right? And you do that by all the pieces we're talking. And it happens over time, but it happens if you're consistent, persistent about it. But it's about making sure they know they belong, make sure they are in a place where they can engage in learning, make sure it's really high quality instruction, make sure you're paying attention to where they're doing well and not doing well, and adjusting. So it's all these pieces, and that really rich curriculum instruction, professional development work, which we're engaged in, is what helps kids learn more deeply. And test scores rise, okay? But we're not looking for a quick fix. So we ask patience of our students and our teachers, and all our staff, our school leaders, and we have to ask patience of ourselves for that. But we want that learning to be reflected in a variety of assessments, including MCAS. Well, folks are up for that because that's what we're doing.
I want to thank James for his passion from this subject.
I really appreciate all the opportunities to come here and share this part of the work, right? Which is really exciting, and to hear the questions and invite you into the work. And it was really great to work with Amy on this too. I just want to say, right, to have a different perspective on some of this work that began deeply with Greg and then picking it up with Amy and hearing her become passionate about these things at the high school, and it's been really a great part of this process, so.
Thank you.
Moving on.
Moving
All
on.
right, I left off, we're gonna invite our friends, Chelsea and Marilyn, to come up and join us, and while they're transitioning to the table up front here. I'm just gonna share one thing I forgot to share earlier, as an update. Get this here. I gave you a document, a sort of summary update this evening about our tiered focus monitoring process. The Department of Elementary and Secondary Education engages in a regular cycle with all districts and charter schools on tiered focus monitoring. In this case, we're in the process on special education, civil rights, and also English language education, both at the same time. Okay, connected because some of the processes, disconnected because they're not the same thing. I'm just happy to have it at the same time. So the purpose of this process, again, all districts go through this on a regular cycle with the Department of Education to monitor compliance with state, federal, and regulations. These are two of the areas, or three of the areas really that are most heavily documented and detailed and sort of tied into state federal law. Help us understand and assess the quality of our processes and procedures, and then also provide technical assistance. So the three phases, and this is detailed in the memo I gave you. Is district self-assessment and document review that happened in the springtime. We went through a self-assessment process, but also provided many documents to them. They've been reviewing those in preparation for the on-site monitoring, which happens this month. And then the reporting, they give us an initial report at the end of that site visit, and then do a more detailed report, and then what they've learned from that, and what the results of that report and the monitoring results in the ongoing monitoring, which happens over intervening years. So, but that's based on the conclusions drawn by the DESE team. So another piece of this is making sure that parents have the opportunity to engage in this process and give input, especially on special education and English language education. One example of that is, just to give you one detail on that, is we have launched Chris Castle over the last years, really getting our English language parent advisory council up and running. They had a meeting today, 7 parents were attended, and they're all going to be part of the DESE site review. So, which is great. And then we'll also have such as parents, students with disabilities also involved in the process. So we communicated widely about that. So I just wanted to make sure you had that update. Any questions about that? More details are in the memo, and we'll give you more details about results after the report. Those are our typical special education or English language education updates about what's happening on theory. So, Ria's going to show the presentation. I'll just introduce our guests. Ellen Rose, the Director of the Health Department. Welcome to the room. Chelsea Goldstein-Walsh, Director of Prevention.
Prevention Director.
Prevention. For the Health Department. They've been working with us, with Amy Cam and I, to look at their youth risk behavior survey data. And Mary Ellen's going to really lead the presentation, but I'll chime in on occasion and make you answer questions to us then. So Maria is going to get it launched and then take it away, right?
Evidently.
I have that right. I'll give one preamble here, which is it's been great working with these two in the health department, as it always been. There's a new team over there, which is great. And the reason we're both presenting tonight is because while, and I think Mary will go more in depth on this, while we're able to use our students to do the survey, this is a Gloucester-wide approach, collaboration. It's all of our students across the city, and we have different roles to play and a great partnership to have on. But we're going to give you that system. We're doing this together.
Okay, so thank you for having me here. So what this risk behavior survey is I'm not sure how familiar you are with it, but we've been doing it since 2003, and it's a biennial. And this was the first year we went to a digital format, which presented its own challenges. As you can all imagine, and we'll talk about that if that comes up. But the administration of it is through the Gloucester High School and the Gloucester Middle School, because that is the most easily accessible to the largest population of students. We had a total of 565 middle school students and 601 high school students whose surveys were actually used for this, for the data gathering. There were slightly, I think about 50 students in each of middle and high school whose surveys were disqualified from use in the aggregated data because they either weren't completed or they were completed in too short a period of time. So they were considered throwaways for the overall data. It's based largely on the CDC's Risk Youth Behavior Survey. And questions are meant to examine behaviors related to diet, sex, activity, substance use, as well as addressing health issues such as safety, violence, stress, and mental health. We're not going to reveal with this presentation all of the data that we covered because it would be here a very, very long time. But to know that what we tried to do is hit on the high points of what were the areas that have most concern, as well as the areas that we really improved upon as far as what we've seen historically in the trend data. So this basically, the slides that he's been going through is what I've just went through. 9 through 12 at the high school, 6 through 8 at O'Malley. They completed it online for the first time. The surveys are anonymous. The students do not provide names or any identifying information. All the information is aggregated and analyzed by a third party. That we hired this year was a different third party than we've used in the past. So it's the survey was significantly more expensive this year and as a result of going digital. And so Leahy picked up half of the expense for that. It's a $30,000 survey that's conducted. The individual student surveys are never shared. Thanks. Okay.
Next. So Mary, you can Maria's control.
Oh, you have it? Okay.
Sorry.
My bad. All right. 90% of the middle school students actually were included in the analysis. We had a little bit of a drop in the high school students. Obviously, I was reading this earlier and didn't realize on that time limitation if they went through it too fast, which was a little bit disconcerting because kids who can read fast would finish it fast. So I was really surprised that they actually discount those surveys based on time status. But again, we're using a brand new analytical team and we have a little bit of growing pains to go through yet. And again, like many of the things in the department, I inherited this. So it'll probably change next year. So do we have any questions so far about demographics? Okay, next please. So there are some acronyms that are used. Obviously, the numbers represent the grades. M, male, female, GNC is gender non-conforming, HL, Hispanic, Latino, LGBTQ plus. And then the caret represents less than 10 students responded to this question. That only happened in, I believe, the middle school responses for the Asian population. Next. These are the sample demographics. Oh my gosh, so you can see that I'm not going to belabor the details of this. So I'm going to leave it up to you to stop and ask questions, but we have the demographics.
So part of that, couple is just so when we see percentages, we also see percentage of how large a group. Not that, and this is where things get in terms of using this data, analyzing it, is if there's information that's concerning about a group, even if it's a small group, it's still concerning for if there's a substance abuse issue, or a safety issue, a mental health issue, even though some places the percentage is small, it's still a concern. You don't dismiss it because it's a small percentage, or I should say a small n, small number of students.
Yeah.
At the same time, we're looking for patterns and places of particular concern that often will be, where there are higher percentages reporting experiences.
That is a detail that I want to make sure is very clear because most of the reporting is on percentages. And we have the N, which is not the number of, it's the number of respondents for that question. So the percentage is 45% of that number. So you'll see several times there, we have less than students at 10 students actually represented by some of the subgroups. And because obviously Gloucester is a highly white population in schools as well, those numbers will be represented as, it looks like a smaller percentage, but numerically, as far as students are represented, will be a higher number. So that's the only thing to keep in mind mathematically for this.
And Marilyn, before we go into, Mayor, can you just go back to the slide that says, sort of gives the nice presentation? I want to give the overview of what we're covering here. Just the top of areas. Can you go back to, it's like the second slide. Yeah, there we go. So back on what RBS Maryland's doing that right now. Then these are 4 areas: mental health, substance use, school-related factors, and safety. So you have a big picture of those 4 areas that we're going to cover. You have the draft of this in your packet, so you can follow along. Now, you take it.
Slide number 8, please. Okay, so we've color coded the breakouts of the different groups so that you can see not every single slide has trend data or grade, but they will have some function of these subgroups. Obviously, gender identity, race, ethnicity, and sexual orientation. Any questions? Okay, so do you want to take this
Sure,
first
yeah.
one?
So in terms of primary takeaways, these are sort of the big headlines that folks want to, we sort of learn by looking at the data. First of all, substance use sees a significant decline. We're probably at our lowest levels of reported substance use in 2013. Okay, vaping has dropped by half since 2019, and then at the same time we've seen this, and this is actually a pattern. LGBTQ plus students and gender non-conforming students have the highest risks across multiple factors. I'll come back to that point and make it a little more broad. But the basic information we see around substance use is that we see significant declines from what's reported this year. A second headline, second important like primary takeaway is mental health. So definitely see that students are reporting higher levels of anxiety and also coping and behaviors related to depression. Okay. You don't diagnose through a single question on a survey, but the behaviors are reporting at higher levels than in the past. That's not surprising. Seeing as we were just talking about earlier tonight, Melissa raising that. At the same time, they do report some important coping strategies, that they have coping strategies that are still, the Gloucester youth report they have coping strategies and they use them. 71%. And 71% of them are using them, which is a high percentage. And also have report pretty high levels of what we call protective factors, specifically around having adults they trust to go to. But you definitely see it. You'll see this reflected in the numbers here. There's the higher levels of reported anxiety and behaviors related to depression. I think Amy Can wants to say something.
I really want to say something because I didn't read this yet, the slide before tonight. So I would be careful to say it's higher levels in anxiety. The question is worry. What do I worry about? It's a symptom of anxiety. It's not anxiety. So I think I just want to be clear that we're not like dying.
And if people wanted to hear more about that distinction, they can come on
So
Tuesday.
I apologize, kids. So yeah.
That is that some of the problems with the way
They asked
the questions were asked, I have a lot of problems with some of the questions and the way they were asked, and then the way they were reported back to us. They manipulated some of the words. We had to go back several times to say that's not what you actually asked, and we certainly shouldn't be reiterating it using a different vocabulary.
Yeah.
So
The other two here, just LGBTQ plus gender non-conforming students are certainly at highest risk among multiple domains. We'll put it out there. That's substance abuse, that's mental health and self-injurious behaviors, and also experiencing bullying, and also lowest protective factors. This is not a surprise. LGBTQ students, youth, I should say, that is just commonly reported, common experience. It is one of the unfortunate facts of life for our LGBTQ plus students in our society. Gloucester reflects that now. Okay, it's not different than reality, and it's concerning for all of us. And then another piece here is that, and we'll report on this, is that our city, our schools, and our partners are providing more support in these areas. It's hard for me to say ever before, but certainly in the recent past, in terms of what schools are aware of. Okay, and it seems from folks who've been out here longer, more than before, and that's on multiple levels. That's in terms of just assessment. That's in terms of partners and schools and others. And when I say partners, I'm thinking Gloucester Health Department as well, providing services and connecting the services, but then also in terms of developing our ability to provide services in multiple languages, such as Spanish, Portuguese. That's all. It's developing better than it was before. None of it probably where we want to be. So those are the 4 primary takeaways from a complicated survey. Now, I'll hand it off.
So the plan, we have more slides than we can possibly go through. So what I'd like to do is to give you a chance to just eyeball basically the graphs and a lot of this. What you'll see is the questions that are directed at high school students and some of the questions that are directed to middle school students, they're the same, but they didn't have as many questions. So you'll have the subcategory of mental health in the left-hand corner, the school grouping up in the left-hand corner, the actual question that is being asked across the top, along with the responses that were aggregated into the percentages that were created. So what you're getting is if a student answered fairly often or very often, those are put together as one percentage. So
I'm using the survey.
I'm sorry?
I'm just asking that just the survey seems to highlight that there's issues with the way we're asking questions, and I'm just wondering.
Yeah.
Why we're not doing it a better way, and it's not a reflection of anything
that's
other than.
a legitimate question that you ask yourself.
Like I said, so having inherited this and
Yeah, no, I understand.
consultant, it's
Right.
very frustrating because in some areas they actually grouped 3 and 4 responses to make it even higher. So
Right.
and unfortunately, in a lot of scientific research and in survey research, number one, this is a self-report, which is always already skewed and it's in and of itself. And that's perspective and it's of students and they're doing it during homeroom. And it was a fairly it was a difficult setup in that you're coming in out of COVID. And so there's a lot of skewed data in here where you'll see precipitous drops from 2019, which was the last time that we took it. So we almost expect to see a equally high rise when we get back to normalizing behaviors and socialization and access issues across the city. So when we report this again, I don't want you to be horribly shocked that, oh my gosh, we're going up. It's actually a balancing act of what's coming on and the viewpoints of the students when they're taking the survey. So before they were always able to take it on paper, but you're able to hide a little bit of what you're writing. Now they're taking it on a book, which is visible to the people behind them. So even their answers may have been affected by that. And that's all part of a learning curve and seeing what they're most comfortable with, but also how to get the data most quickly and to be able to manipulate it. Yes. So I really appreciate the position you've been put in, which sounds hard, right? To be who have inherited this also coming out of COVID. So I'm sort of wondering, there's so much data here, like what, other than those 4 points that just what should we take from this? Because it's hard to, it's going to be hard to go through from my perspective. I just to make my statements to me, if we go through lots of these questions and answers, I don't really know what to take from this or what I should be learning as a school committee member that's significant in how we operate our schools and what we should be focusing on. What is there a way to point us to really what you feel is the most significant thing that we can come away from this? But yeah, but I think that the bottom line, up front of this and what we Department of Defense all the time is basically you have data taken from the population that you're responsible for. And you have to look at how do we approach this data going forward with not what we want to do for the kids, but what do the kids most need? What are they telling us are some of the issues they're grappling with? And
taking the data with a little bit of a grain of salt, knowing the situation around which they're taking it, knowing the culture of Gloucester that these kids are operating in, and the larger world in which they operate, primarily even thinking at the media influence. They've just spent a year and a half enclosed in a home with nothing but the media influence, which is going to drastically affect how they operate. So when you do a survey, I just want you to always take the data with that in mind and not just look at the numbers and have a shock factor either way. But take your role in the understanding that the Department of Health and the school system, as well as all of the organizations that we either are financially supporting throughout the city of Gloucester or our independent organizations, are working together probably more effectively than ever to not replicate services and to use what we have most effectively. And your job is to say, well, how can we wrap around what you're already doing? And how can we support it through the school system? So for instance, if there was a program that was directed at kids, and we actually had a program directed at parents, but we don't have access to parents of the kids who may be having a particular struggle in the school system. Rather than work in opposition to one another of, well, those are our kids and our parents, if we work together as a unit, as a community, we will be able to accomplish more. So your job as a school committee is to look at this data and say, how can we work with the Department of Health? How can we work with the schools? How can we work with the churches, with the sports, with every area that the kids are involved, with the families, with any other involvement that they're in, even regionally, because we have kids obviously at other school systems in this area. So how do we all cooperate to find what is wrong and how to move forward and implement those things in a way that are actually going to produce outcomes? Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, again, I defer to the chair, but that seems to me what Amy and we as the school committee, we listen to their expertise on how this all works, right? Like we are not in that position. Our administration and our social emotional and the people who are working in our health, with our health of the students, families, it sounds like. I mean, yes.
Yes.
So yes. Put this into a broader perspective, like it's so good for us, it's so important for us to hear. I'm especially encouraged that the local organizations are working together so well. I guess Amy, like, how can we best use the information that's been gathered?
I guess, so looking at the domains, okay, so I don't think the mental health surprises us. And I think I just was at the state conference and they reported their state data just came in and they were seeing elevated scores in this YRBS from also. They also saw a drastic decline in substance use. So it's consistent with our data. So that's the data. But I would say like it needs to be more like parts of this need to be further explored. So for instance, on this one, I wrote this one and what do they worry about in school? We don't know. I don't know. Is it they worry about,
School issues.
right, like right now it's a school issue. That's important to know, to have dialogue with kids. Like, what is it about school that, is it academics? Is it, college? Is it getting here? Is it COVID? I don't know.
With the peers.
So peers, well, peers is socially, that's why I didn't say peers. The reason I didn't say peers because it says social. Next, it could be both, right? So, so I think we empower kids to tell us the story. This is numbers, but there's kids behind these numbers. So one kid, that is one, right? So we have a lot of, so what we did when we went through the data, which was like, which we will do, I think, but here is to look at every domain and really look at what we are doing, what we need to probably continue to do. And a lot of them are based on partnerships. We are kids have complex needs and we are a school. So we need to engage those partners and when you look through the rest, it really highlights every domain, every partnership and what we're doing in every domain. And there might be some things we need to shift. because now we're seeing gender nonconforming and LGBTQ. We know we have SAGA, I've run it for 15 years here, sexual and gender acceptance. I partnered with NAGLI, I developed a steering committee with businesses and community partners, and I created a NAGLI at Unity. Unity, NAGLI is North Shore Alliance for Gay and Lesbian Youth. And they're in Salem, and none of my kids could get to Salem. There was barriers. So my dream was to like have a community-based group here, because not every kid who identifies or needs support is going to go to a school-based group. So that group is running. I still run it.
And as you said to Bill,
yeah.
and we need to learn more by listening to students and from others about how to support the students, because they are reporting in student numbers some real risks. But that goes back to what you said, Marianne said, is investigate more on some of these things. Probably don't just on this one example, feeling unsafe and due to the violence in the community, there's violence in Gloucester, I'm not saying there's not, but it's lower on the level of what our kids are concerned about. Okay? Whereas with other ones, school issues is quite high. That in this one slide, it tells us if we're going to start asking questions, probably about that stuff, school issues, as opposed to violence in the community. It just leads us to a place where we can inquire further, and a great place to begin. That isn't just the schools. I really appreciate what Marianne saying is like, it's not a school's issue. This data is not a school issue. It's a community issue. And that's why we're going to get it presented. Thank you.
Yes.
Looking at these categories, they're pretty vague and subjective.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, on the surveys, were they more explicit?
No.
Not at all.
So this is,
Those are the questions.
this is the part that is so frustrating, but you can only ask so much of a student when you're taking a survey. It's most self-report generalized surveys, they look like this, and they lend themselves to the next level of questioning. So what this basically does is give you a 30,000 foot level of, well, these are sort of the issues. Really, there are some questions that I was responsible for with regard to safety issues. Have you experienced, what was my question? Have you experienced violence, violence in the home? So what was this? But it was verbal violence.
So there are a few questions. One was about physical violence, one was about emotional and or verbal
Did you receive
violence.
verbal or emotional abuse from someone in your family? Well, if I told my son when he was 10 years old, no, you can't. And he says, well, I want to. And I said, well, now you're not going to, and now you're not. That, as far as what he may have learned on the media or whatever, that is verbal and emotional abuse. And this is in the past 12 months. So of course, every single middle school student in the city should have reported, yes, I have absolutely experienced verbal and emotional abuse in my home.
My son tells me that all.
Right, so but that's the whole thing about data, is you have to look at what is the question that's being asked and who is the respondent of that question. So you can't just take this and run with it. All of these horrible things are happening, or all of these great things are happening. You have to use your intellect. And that is the objective of what we do with kids. These kids need to be given the opportunity to be resilient and to learn coping skills. And when we're compared to the Massachusetts rates, we have increased rates of substance use across the board compared to Massachusetts, except in cigarette use, which is ironic. But if you think about it, we have had decades of starting with youth, mommy, those cigarettes are bad, right? And so those youth are now in their 60s and probably aren't smoking as much as my parents would be in their 80s and 90s. So it's a very long game for these things. So now you have marijuana that's been legalized. So you see students looking at that as, harm, it's not a big deal, because my parents smoke all the time. When I was looking at our fentanyl strips that we just brought in, and I offered them to different people in the community, the responses I got from people my age and slightly younger, and I'm in my 60s, was, I know my kids are getting high and smoking pot, but we're growing it for them, so it's no big deal. There's no worry of fentanyl in it. And so, one of the problems in Gloucester is this generational substance use. So we can't put everything on the school system to solve the problem. You have to look at it at the larger part. And so I think as the school committee, you yield the power to say, this is in our school, but it's also in our community. And so we can't just stand alone and solve it and push back against the parents who are putting it all on you, or teachers. You can't expect your teachers to solve all of these problems. And so there's a lot of exposure here that they can get help from, but they cannot do it alone. And Amy certainly can't do it alone. And so I think that that's where you have to see limited resources and limited, money, people, and time. And what are you going to do with that? That's your role at the bottom line of all of this. So now that you don't want to go through all of
So I
data,
think
just, what do you think? I mean, Ben?
No, I want questions from the committee, and then we may want to highlight a couple of things, but just want to make sure this is helpful to you, and so, these questions. As I want you.
I just have a quick question. So, reading through the substance use piece, I noticed it stops at marijuana, like it doesn't ask about pills or other substances. I didn't see it.
Some of the
see any
questions
data.
are around prescription medications that are not prescribed.
You're looking at a particular slide.
No, I'm looking at, I gotta find it now, because I was kind of going through all of it. But it seemed like the questions were geared at marijuana, up into marijuana.
No,
If you go to slide
26 is
20,
middle school. 26 is middle school,
or 25 actually.
25 is high school.
Yeah.
And you have to look to, we're looking at substance use in
Oh,
two
prescription drugs
categories.
and
One
not-
is lifetime use, which means have you ever used it? And the other is current use, which is in the last 30 days.
Okay. I think it was the comments, didn't really mention it as well.
If you look across the bottom, you're looking at
Yeah.
cigarettes, vape,
Prescription drugs. and-
alcohol, prescription drugs. And the question is prescription drugs that were not prescribed to you.
It's decreased. Okay, I see it now. Thank you.
I think the other piece of this, and so I wish this uses is, as you said, as Amy said, across the state, our decline is still in the state. Is that an access issue because of COVID? Who knows? Is it a reporting issue? We don't know. But it's something to say, that may be really good news, but we don't know enough. That'll happen over time. That's I know that could balance out next time we go up. Can't claim victory and say it's a positive, it's not a conclusion.
If you look at the trend, I mean, the slides that actually have trend data, where you're seeing an upward trend or a downward trend, and then there's this differential reporting in 2019. I would almost look at where the trend was going. Are we using more? Are our behaviors getting worse? Are they getting better? And then go from there, as opposed to, because there is some roller coaster effect in some of this data as well. And every section has a summary page, if you want to just go to that.
Yeah, I do want to show a couple in mental health to point things out for folks. So, Maria, I'm going to ask you to go to a certain slide. So go to slide 12, please. So this is the question around that leads to anxiety or behaviors related to depression. But you feel like so sad, angry, or hopeless almost every day. This is over the past 12 months for 2 weeks or more in a row. You stop doing some new activities. Okay? Those are some of the indicators of depression. It's not a conclusion. We also see it's a complicated question, multiple pieces. But in terms of many kids responded. So we look for what are the lows, what are the highs, right? So it's interesting that males report at levels much lower than females are not conforming. It's also notable that although the N is small, but they're not conforming percentage-wise as a group, that they're reporting higher levels of this sort of experiences, so sad, angry, hopeless. So, and we also see that in terms of race, lowest level is percentage-wise, is not numbers, is our Asian students, and the highest are Black. Other races that we have, white, other, and multiracial, are similar. They're in the same ballpark. Okay? And then the very obvious one here is in the yellow, heterosexual and LGBTQ+. Again, that difference is important to pay attention to. Okay? And if we go to the next slide, Maria, again, you see similar significant differences where in race, very, very similar percentage-wise, okay? Significant differences by gender, significant difference by sexual preference. So those are, and again, this is self-injurious behavior. Okay? Not something that's uncommon. Okay? It happens, But, and so, and we don't want, and I think what's here is you see that the trend on the left-hand side of this slide, Gloucester has reported in line with the state. So the state in 2019 was at 18 and we were 70%. So we're not an anomaly there. If we're an anomaly there, we pay attention. We really got to pay attention. It's sad to know that across the state, 78% of students engage in self-harming behavior. Okay, that's like a ton. But then what are the anomalies here? We see it in gender differences, and we see it in sexual. Again, that leads us to start asking more questions. So just wanted to point out a few of those. And then, get into more difficult ones around considering attempting suicide. And then we do ask, and on slide 15 is the one about coping strategy you mentioned.
Ben, if you, to back you up on 12 and 14, we're 4 percentage points, 4 and 5 percentage points below the state average. So our kids are happier and less suicidal than state average, which is good news.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's right. So on considering attempting suicide, okay, we're, as you said, 5 percentage points in 2019 below the state average. So that's a positive, and that has been steady. At the same time, within that data, there are some things to pay attention to. And then on slide 15, which is about coping strategy you mentioned earlier, you see that the overall 71% of our high school students, have report anyway having a healthy activity or behavior to relieve stress. Which is a very large number. We wanted higher, of course, but I mean that may be more than most adults. So I just wanted to point out some of those. And there we see, just on a quick look, not many anomalies. You look for, who's the highest here, who's the lowest in terms of this maybe places to look further. So I just want to point out a few of those for folks. It can support some of that's why we made some of the moves we did.
It's a question, and I remember from the last one that we heard, I think 2 years ago or more. One of the questions that I found most interesting, I'm wondering if we asked it again, is how students having a trusted adult in. So for me, that was a really significant question. I'd be curious where that.
So let's go to those, okay? But before we go, can you go to slide 21, please?
I can say go to the 21.
Yeah. So because what we did want to capture isn't just like here's the data, but we also want to capture it and communicate like the things we're doing, And so, Amy, if you could just summarize these quickly.
So
This is specific on mental health.
yeah, so I mostly selected things, we're doing a lot more than this, but that had partnerships. Because we were going to make them, but we were going to do that at a different date. The universal screening in SOS is important. The universal screening is what that we're trying to give out screenings to all students for anxiety and for substance use. And the state actually really likes that because we use that opportunity when there's heightened in both areas. We can teach kids about the interconnectedness between self-medicating for anxiety and try to get them help that's not maladaptive. And then what you may not be aware of is that we run as a district SOS, which is signs of suicide. That's done in the middle school and the high school. It's an evidence-based depression awareness and suicide prevention program. It is done in health class, and we do the BDAD screening in that, which is a depression screening. So those kids, so like I used to run those classes, I would have sometimes 22 kids self-identify. So it's a big job because you have to respond quickly in that day, but it's worth it. It's a very good program, and we have kids who identify other kids. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to say it speaks to how we connect like this kind of data that we get to then practices and things that we do, and how then we enact deeply, what Amy was saying earlier about how any one student in these categories is too many, right? So by doing this next level, like the GAD-7, we're then identifying individual students that we know their names, and then we can connect them with other help and support. Right, so that's one of the ways that the the view from here on all of our students together helps them inform, okay, what things do we want in place to identify the individual students? And then how can we support those individual students? So it's a good example of, you know, what.
And I'm sorry, and the biggest part of that is really teaching kids what to do if they're concerned about their peer, because they're gonna know a lot quicker than we are. And so we also in the classroom like talk about, okay, like why don't you wanna, like what stops you from telling us? Like what are the barriers? What could make it easier? What are other ways you could do it that could keep you anonymous? So we really try to work with the kids in terms of how to be help seeking and not, you know, and know how to access those supports.
And understanding the limitations of that you are not.
Right. No, they're not
Because
there,
kids will-
right.
Yeah, because kids will tend to try and counsel one another and they have to know where the stop
The
gets.
trusted adult. So we encourage them in all of our prevention efforts to connect to trusted adults. So that is like a theme in anything we do, whether it's dating violence prevention, whether it's suicide prevention, whether it's substance use prevention, it's always to get to trusted adults.
And then the teachers have training or
Trusted.
on how to
They-
get to the next level of professional support, right? Because they're not all equipped either, but they're equipped to connect, right? So it's a continuum of warm handoffs and to make sure the students get the support that they need.
And so the second part is we're running the tier 2 trails, which is a CBT and mindfulness 7-week skill development for kids who either score elevated and want this service, or they've heard about it and the parent reaches out or a therapist reaches out. So it's accessible by many points. And that's been really, really successful. And then the mental health literacy, we're partnering with the health department, funded by Tower Foundation, to train all 10th graders in teen mental health first aid. We do a lot of mental health literacy training, trying to get kids to be able to identify and respond to mental health and substance use issues. So we do it through the mental health ambassadors. We do it through now this. We've had all the Gloucester High School years ago, I think it's more than a few years, but whatever, trained in teen mental health. So we keep trying to, you know, keep it in the conversation. And then the student assistance program is I developed like a long time ago, and I'm so proud of this program, but it's really embedded. And it started with DFC money, substance abuse prevention. So it's really, but I was like, no kid is gonna ever knock on my door and say, I have a substance use problem. We have to make it mental health and substance use. And that's how I modeled it. It's still going in all of North Shore schools, except for Manchester, I think, but, and Leahy runs that for us, and there's a program at, the O'Malley, and we're trying to reinstate it in the high school. Okay, thank you.
So that's just one area, it's mental health, okay? But you also mentioned about trusted adults.
So we have a question right here.
We have the data.
We have the data right here.
Yes, no, yeah, so if Maria, if you can go to slide 30, and that's a good transition segue into the school related results. Show folks just what that is, so slide, sorry, next slide. So is there at least one teacher or other adult in the school that you can talk to if you have a problem? So you see here that the bars are taller, that's good news. So as it says, 77% of Gloucester High School students report having at least one teacher or other adult in school they can talk to if they have a question. Okay? That's really positive. It also grows from earlier grades to later grades, okay? Which makes sense, but it also it can be alarmed if it's getting worse, right? So it's good that it supports that sort of thing. Now there are some differences by race. So one challenge is that while our white students, which is the majority of students, are 79% reporting have an adult they can trust. Hispanic, Black, and Asian students are reporting lower levels. Okay, still good. Okay, but you know, want to make it better. It's 71, 65%, and 62, 67% respectively. Okay, again, in those differences, we can learn from to make sure that all our students, or as many students as possible, especially have this key component of high school, which is to have at least one adult in the world inside the high school to go. It's long been a key indicator of safety, of health, of a strong culture in school. That's why we do it well. This is something that's sort of a classic, very important question. And then you can see that our statewide that we're similar. Statewide is actually 74% 2019, so we're similar to the state. We're not too high above it. We'd like to get higher, of course, but we're not an anomaly in terms of being low. So that number we have is solid. At the same time, it's really leveled off. You know, look at the trend data there on the left-hand side. You know, and so when we talk about belonging and relationships in high school, we want to increase that. And that's one of the reasons, but we don't want to level off and keep on getting stronger and stronger.
I think, well,
Yeah, good.
the only one that was a little troubling on this is because everything else is an upward trend, and then you go to the gender, and then when the gender non-conforming, that there was such a drop in the fact that they had a trusted adult, which is you know, largely probably a community failure in that if they're not feeling comfortable at home or in the school, there's got to be something where they can have that outlet. And even more disconcerting to me was that at middle school, the levels were much lower than they were in the high school. So there were, if they're coming in feeling unsure, so they're at least finding somebody at the high school level, which is good because every other one that's gotten worse, and once they get to high school, anxiety and use of everything of substances and such. But
Yeah, so Maria put up on the middle school slide the same
is
question.
it up?
Yeah, it's up, and you can see that about 5 to 10 points lower, if not more, and also higher discrepancies between within a subgroup basically. Okay? So higher differences between female and male in this. Interestingly, gender non-conforming in this case is the highest. Okay, so that's also something happening where we're doing that, connecting and supporting gender non-conforming students at middle school well. Okay? That's not inclusion, but it's definitely something of interest. And so, and then also you see at Bailey downward trend, downward slippage in terms of overall answer this question. That's something.
Well, and it may be in the middle school too, there's a lot more latitude for, well, they're, young adolescent going to things and people are a lot more tolerant of, they may not look at GNC as strongly as they will once they're in high school. As far as feeling comfortable, still staying in that area.
Another, in terms of school aid, if you go to slide 33, please.
What number?
33. So do you agree or disagree that you feel safe in school? These answers are agreeing strongly. Okay? You can see 59% of high school students agree or strongly agree with that question, that they felt safe in school. Well, that's something to look into, because first of all, that's not a high number. But second of all, what does it mean to feel safe? Like what do they mean when they answer that question? Because the 4 of us can answer that question, that's something very different in mind. Okay? But it's definitely a place where you want to look further into for a number of reasons. One, a few of these questions, this one specifically is about school specific. Most of these are not. Okay, but these ones certainly are. So that's something. Then Marie, if you go to the same question on middle school, if you take a look at that, that's 39. So a little bit higher overall, but also differences between within subgroups. That's where they're across subgroups, basically, I should say. So again, very similar. What we need to know more about this, in terms of what this means, when people are telling us what they're thinking, what are they feeling unsafe about. It could be last year. It could be COVID. It could be bullying. Okay, it could be discrimination. That sort of thing. You don't know that.
Yeah, the trouble with this word safe, as of late, that word has evolved to not just mean physical safety, emotional safety. And so that it gets a little mucky, I would say, that this.
Yeah, and those are both equally important.
But yeah, I mean,
So-
you have to understand,
But one might be more important than the other. Physical safety, I would think, would be.
not necessarily. I mean, safety is safety because if you don't, it's a basic need to feel safe. If I don't feel safe, I can't concentrate in school, whether that's emotional safe or physical safe. Safety is a very basic need for a student in any environment. And if they're not feeling safe, no matter how they define it. So that's an area that while I understand you're defining it differently and, but to put a emphasis on one being more important than the others, as far as safety, it's too basic. It's too basic a need to discount one as more important than the
I think it's a separate question.
Emotional versus physical.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why we say, like, we have to, find out more about what kids are saying or thinking when they're answering this question. Is it emotional safety? Is it physical safety? Right.
Or you need to ask.
Yeah.
Question.
But I mean, as I was saying earlier, so in terms of like, we use the CAD to speak to that transition, because my role of being here is to talk about it with Amy, to talk about what then we do. So we're very interested in this because of that brain-based culturally responsive model, right? It's like the part of the brain basis is exactly about safety. If I don't feel safe in this environment, I'm not safe to do active processing, to enter into group work with my peers, because I'm worried about, am I okay? And that might be socially, that might be what's happening here right now.
It's a chemical
right?
basis. They don't
And
have
exactly,
control
that's right, it's a brain-based response. And so for us, I'm really interested, this you're pointing out, like I'm interested in finding out more. And so then that's what we do, is then we will find out more. And we also want to know who, right? Like in the actual students and how we might benefit, help those individual students, right? So this points out this view, and we then go, okay, that's something we want to look at more closely.
And numerically too, because a lot of these students, again, some of these numbers are less than 10, which means if you have less than 10 kids that you can actually focus on, you don't need to do a full school blast to worry everybody about an issue necessarily. But if you have 40 something kids with a problem, that's a classroom full of kids that need a discussion.
Yeah.
Is that what it is? Okay, it's 30.
Back in the day, it was one.
Back in the day, well, and yet we still are. But yeah, it's really important that you look at the numbers as well, so that you understand the approach that they will be using, finding those, because obviously you cannot hunt down and target these kids based off of these surveys. So again, you're still looking at self-report or self-identification of these issues, especially when it comes to family violence and feeling unsafe in the home.
And then I think I just want to point out a couple other school related ones, obviously, because just is around bullying. So you got number 34. Please, and it's the high school first. So again, these are quite low. Okay, they're significant for any individual who's experiencing this, but they're still quite low. Overall, 9%, only 9% of high school students reported being bullied in school in the past 12 months. And we do see some anomalies within that. LGBTQ again, non-conforming again. See some differences reported in terms of grade levels as well. So 9th being higher than 10th, 11th, and 12th. If you go to then the equivalent slide for middle school, where you'll find it fast, I will. See, it's higher. Okay, 25% overall students being bullied in the past 12 months. That's enough. Could be a number of things. Okay, but we need to find out what it is. Okay, part of it is, having been a middle school teacher, it is the age. This is how students are learning how to interact at middle school with other kids. Okay, they're interacting in different ways. Okay, when they get to high school, often because as their brains develop and move to high school, there's a little bit less interest in doing some of that stuff. Okay, it doesn't mean we say it's okay. It's just that's their age. That's how we used to approach it. But we does point out that something to look at, and then particularly again. Are there specific areas that we pay close attention to? It has a good trend in terms of the left-hand side there. It's been going down every year since 2013. Okay, for how many students that don't feel bullied. Okay, but we can get better at it. That's some of the things we're working on. Yeah.
So I know we're asking this on the survey, but we have bullying policies in place that we spent hours and hours and hours on that 50-page document that were created years ago. Are we keeping track of the incidents here as opposed to using the survey? Like how many bullying incidents is being reported? How many interventions have there been by school personnel and things like that? Are we
we keep those records and they may not line up because not everything's reported.
Right,
And that sort of thing, you know, and also not everything's reported rises to bullying.
but I'm curious to know if the levels that you said have gone down since 2013, have reports to the school gone
Yeah,
down as
yeah, I
well?
think that's
Or no? I mean, we don't really hear too much about that.
right. It should support that. I mean.
Yeah.
That's how it's going. And then there's another piece which, you know, is still relatively new, although it's been around for longer than, you know, it's cyber. So if you can go to the next one, I think, 41, yeah. So 41, so again, the reported levels of cyberbullying at O'Malley have decreased, okay? You know, since well, you know, since the last 3 or 4 years, lowest level since 2013. That's a positive. Still, nearly 20% of students are reporting that. And I think the other piece about we were talking about electronic bullying or cyberbullying is that there's no boundary to it. You know, it can happen at any moment, including in class. I mean, not as much at O'Malley right now because kids don't have phones. It's just one of the reasons we did that. With phones, okay, but it can happen at night when you're home alone. You know? That's I think how the perniciousness of cyberbullying is that it used to be that if you're home alone in your room, you're safe from them and things like that. Team pressures, social pressures, but cyberbullying has no bounds, right? So that's an area. And then if we look at the high school version of that.
Before you, but
Oh, yeah,
before you
sorry.
go on, if you look at the difference also, which is a little bit troubling in the Massachusetts average, we're 11% higher here, which would lend itself to wondering, are they spending more unsupervised time on technology in the home, which is again, educating parents about, we're higher than the average. There's gotta be something going on here beyond obviously the classroom, because they're not necessarily getting bullied electronically during the school day.
And also differences we see in terms of, multiracial students reporting that, 10% plus higher rates, and then also LGBTQ students reporting at, in terms of percentage wise, 20%, more reporting, and then that are not conforming also report 10% more. So, but I do, and then, right, when we're reporting higher than the state, there's behavior, we definitely gotta pay attention, right? And so then looking at the high school version, which is slide 35, again, has dropped, consistently over the years. In this example, we were even with the state in terms of cyberbullying at high school. I don't know if that's state, we don't have the state data yet, but it dropped significantly. That's good. And lower levels here and not as distinct differences in some of the same areas as the middle school. So definitely things to look at here, enough for us to keep on. This is just a complicated and difficult cyberbullying specifically for us to just address and support. So we don't have necessarily more to show you. Happy to answer more questions or dive into some of the areas that we haven't yet if you want to. But just wanted to make sure that a couple of things. One, that we're paying attention, we're looking at this. There's some areas to dig further in, but also just the notion that, as we said again at the end, that this is it's a community-wide information about that should help us across many agencies together for our youth. And it's not a school, it's not helping our issue, but as Marilyn said, it's a city challenge.
So with that being said, can I just ask, are there any next steps, or is there going to be a roundtable brainstorming as a result of this? Besides maybe changing the survey that you inherited, to get more into the actual going on?
So I mean, I really want to get kids involved in it.
Yeah.
This is their data.
Yeah.
They have some answers. I think we need to engage them in a meaningful way with maybe a roundtable, maybe we talked about a youth summit. But I think it needs to be adults and kids, and the kids need to hear this stuff, hear this information, and get engaged in the process of solutions.
We did an educational summit years ago. Experiment committee, like 10 years ago, 12 years ago. the whole community participated and it was great. And I could see this topic being something like that, where I think they rented food sport and hundreds of people came and you learned about the brain then, yeah. But this would be a great topic in our community because it's in almost every home of the topics that are on this survey to get the kids involved more so than parents. So that's a great idea.
We have a new
People talking.
Yeah, can I jump in a little bit? Just from the community side, again, as the part of the representative of the prevention team in the health department, this is what we are focused on, and we are data driven, and we do follow a youth empowerment model as well. And so I'd love to continue our partnership with the school in diving deeper into this data, involving kids in that process, because as Amy said, it is their data. In the past, the Gloucester Youth Leadership Council has used YRBS data to drive their programming. So, but letting the kids lead that charge, because what stands out to me might be very different than what stands out to students themselves. And so I would love to get the community involved. This again is a community issue. Our prevention team is growing. We just hired, as Mary Ellen said, a youth development coordinator who will be kind of leading the charge and engaging young people in leadership opportunities, which includes substance use prevention and mental health promotion. And again, many of the initiatives that have been mentioned are a result of partnerships that have grown out of this community and school relationship. So I love the idea of having a more engaged kind of roundtable discussion, because community issues require community solutions.
And importantly, one of the woman that we hired for leading the youth was in Gloucester, moved to Lynn, back to Gloucester. So she's very familiar with our community, familiar with kids, has worked in the corrections institution. So she's going to be very good for the kids, leading them. She's extremely excited. So we're very happy to have her on board. And what's her name?
Ikia Faison. She's in her third week on the job. But that is that's one of the things that she'll be doing, is connecting with kids and getting them engaged and meaningful work, because we know that when kids are engaged in the community, they're less likely to use substances and more likely to engage in pro-social behaviors.
Yeah, I was wondering, James, does anything, any specific course, like AP course, that maybe this could be part of like one of their special projects, looking at this data?
Yeah, well, actually, it's sort of extracurricular groups like our like mental health ambassadors and our World of Difference ADL group will be looking at this data. As well as the site-based council, which is a mix of students and parents and community members. So and there are particular interventions that the students will be advocating for at a school level. So certain data, like for instance, breaking down safe in school kind of thing is something that the World of Difference can look at, especially because they also are looking at demographic differences, right? So difference in gender expression and gender identification, difference in sexuality, difference in, right? They'll be able to get into ethnicity. That's kind of their lens. So that will be, and then they work closely on advocacy with us. So those are three groups with site-based council in particular, who will be actively looking at this data. And two of them are student-based groups and student-driven groups.
Is there a statistical course?
Oh, we have an AP statistics
Yeah,
course.
that's what I was, something like that, or
Yeah.
certain mental health.
Right, and I think there, what would be useful is like if we have particular, particular question. Our AP statistics, for example, have helped a couple of our groups. We have a gender equity in STEM group, and the students who are in the AP statistics class designed that survey that we gave to students last year to identify some of the experiences of students in classes around gender and teacher interventions when students say things that might be harmful, and how teachers react to that and how that affects kids. So we use the expertise of the AP statistics students to be a team within the gender equity team, and then they presented the data to the teachers. So rather than the whole class, I guess is what I'm saying, we're using that expertise within the other groups. And they're really good, several of the kids my oldest child is one of them and now is in school doing some of that work, so.
Yeah.
In biostatistics, so started right here at GHS with this kind of
Right.
project.
Right.
More questions? Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Chelsea, being here before working with us for a long time, but we getting this stuff, so it was preventable. We digest
Thank you all so much. If anybody wants to learn more about prevention and what we're doing over the please reach out. Happy to chat.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
One item that we need to also go over is veterans on their school start times. Is that now or is this part of the East Veterans update? So this is pretty straightforward. In your policy, in the school committee policy manual, it says that for minor changes in the school schedule, so for opening, superintendent can make that determination. As for more significant, like major changes, that the school committee needs to order. Okay? I'm not sure if this is a major or minor change. Okay, I'm gonna let you guys, I'll just tell you where we are. So the background is our elementary school hours are either 8:30 to 2:30 or 9 to 3. And then Plum Cove, Beaman, East Gloucester, 8:30 to 2:30, and the West Parish and Veterans are 9 to 3. Okay, so in the new school, East Veterans, start go it needs to be 8:30 a.m. to 2:30 a.m. 2:30 p.m. Sorry, that would be a little bit. You get a lot done in that day, though. So sorry about that typo. That obviously didn't change for East Gloucester. Does change for veterans. Obviously, transportation schedules run schools. Okay, I've tried to use that for a long time. Okay, but in all seriousness, we need to separate. West Parish has the most complicated busing, in our system. Okay, and so to separate the other schools away from them by having veterans, go to having East Veterans at 8:30 helps quite a bit to loosen up the transportation system. Basically, it also helps on transportation related to athletics as well. We have to, if we're using all of our buses at that last drop off, as we are now with Plum Cove and with Veterans and West Parish, then it hampers that. Let's get some flexibility on that. So again, folks seem to be pleased with this. There's no we made sure that Principal Fusco announced this, that school we've been discussing it tonight ahead of time, so they had a heads up on it. But again, a vote helps, and it's up to you to decide if it's required or not. But this is really sort of I'm not presenting multiple options here because there really aren't, honestly. But this would be the best. Yeah.
I'm just curious, so if I'm reading this right, every school except West Parish will start at 8:30.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, and that's doable?
That's doable. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's doable. In general, veterans and East Gloucester are the lightest bus load. Okay, but by need for buses. They're combined, obviously. I don't know specifically if we're expanding the need for buses there or not, but Cameron and Lori have said, Ben, this is when school is open. Okay, so yes.
Yeah, I was wondering, did you look into the community's concern about Plum Cove and Beaman with the new rezoning? A lot of the parents were worried if they had to split the kids up and had to go to two different schools at the same time, Plum Cove and Beaman.
Right, sure. There isn't, we're aware of that. You can't.
Okay.
We have the opportunity now to release the complexities around that 9 o'clock start. And especially if you went Beaman at 9 o'clock, well, actually it's not Beaman. There are too many buses that would be at one spot. That's now why we separate Beaman and West Parish.
think when we were talking about the school attendance zones, we did a good job of sort of essentially warning parents that there's gonna be barriers and possible risks to sort of school choosing, right? Depending on, so I think that families are gonna just have to add this into their equation, right? That if they,
Yeah, I just want to make sure it was considered, when
Yeah.
it was possible.
These
Reoccurring
aren't
concern.
choices, these are the new rules that we put in place, the new boundaries.
Yeah.
This isn't a choice for a parent.
no, I mean, if a parent decides like to
To school choice.
school choice,
Yeah.
stay in a certain school. And
Or not, or in this case,
Well,
not school choice.
Not a school choice, though, if they're staying in the school that they're able to stay in, that's not school choice. School choice is going to a school outside of your district.
so what I'm saying is the new, like the siblings, right, there's a
Right.
risk to those siblings not being able to go to that school if they decide to stay. Remember how we talked about how there's some students that might get separated depending on the numbers. And the problem with that is that if they have to go to two different schools, the start times are at the same time. But I think families are just gonna have to consider that as part of their decision making. That's something that we can't problem solve, I think is outside of our ability to problem solve that for families. You have a question?
I do, I have more comments to that than that, but my question was, back to East Veterans. So school's gonna start a little bit earlier over there. Do they currently have a breakfast program in place there?
Yes.
So kids, a lot of kids go there early regardless,
Right, yeah, and all our schools have.
Oh, they all have.
Yeah,
but I thought
so right now, at this point,
kids is usually high attended. I thought.
yeah,
One
it's
of the
very well
most
attended, and actually more, for example, this Plum Congress had really good attendance recently, this year and starting last year, just because of just, better work on organizing public side, but anyway. At this point, veterans rather, staff available and this fund was available for, students that arrive from around 8:10, okay? And then school is at 9,
Right,
and
move
Bob,
that back up a little bit.
no, and actually talking that through, is that 8:10 isn't because it's 50 minutes before the school starts, it's because that's when families need it.
Okay,
So now families will still need 8 or 8:10, but it just happens that school starts sooner.
and will they have enough time to do the breakfast program?
Yeah,
That's my
yeah,
question.
yeah, so because you may explain this better than I can.
So East Gloucester currently has breakfast starting at 8:10.
Okay,
And they all have plenty
They
of
all
time
work.
to eat breakfast
Okay.
and get to class in time. There'll be more kids that have breakfast, but we're gonna have a larger, beautiful
Yeah,
cafeteria to
exactly.
accommodate that. So they'll have more time. I mean, there's not enough time to eat, just this, it's the same as what East Gloucester does now.
okay, and on the opposite end, after school program will start earlier and.
Once this
Okay.
is finalized, we'd have to reach out to the YMCA, and with Pathways. And they accommodate that schedule for the other schools, so I don't foresee that to be a problem.
It's the committee, I support a vote.
Make a motion.
I move we accept the new start time for, I guess basically just East Veterans is the, yes, of 9 o'clock.
No.
Sorry, 8:30. Put these on. 8:30.
Okay.
Second,
The school hours will be 8:30 to 2:30, should probably be specific.
Yes.
Okay, all right, any discussion? Okay, Miranda, how about please?
Ms. Weason.
Yes.
Chairperson Clancy.
Yes.
Mr. Melvin.
yes,
Mr. Minio.
Yes.
Ms. Prince.
Yes,
Mayor Verda.
Yes.
And Ms. Watson.
Yes.
Okay, there you go.
thank you very much, that's very helpful.
And one other under deliberations on education is budget development guidelines and schedule.
Yes, bring it up during the BNF subcommittee, but let's get into it. You want to start doing the BNF subcommittee and I'll pull that up.
are you gonna put up anything while I'm giving the report?
I'm gonna put that, that's a timeline schedule up.
No, why don't you do that first, and then I can just skip over that.
I think you wanted time to pull it up.
Exactly.
So we wanted to start.
Okay, so I'm just gonna do this report from a high level.
Report is on report.
So the BNF subcommittee met on November 16th, 2022. We met here in person. One of the first topic we discussed was transportation bus bids. Our lease, sorry, brain cramp there. Our leases are expiring in June. So we have to do some outreach to determine what our next steps are gonna be with our buses. And the topic of discussion that came up was electric buses and what potential is there for us to bring electric buses to this school district. It wasn't a decision process that we were talking about, it was more about talking about what we have now. We put a couple bids out to buy new buses, it's too expensive, we can lease probably 16 buses. And there's a potential to maybe purchase some buses that are 5 years older, that are electric buses. And we are considering doing that and having those conversations because evidently there's some grant money out there that is reimbursing school districts that have electric buses in their fleet. However, currently right now, from what was reported by Gary, is it's usually school districts that have a lot of electric buses that get those reimbursements. As we know, electric buses are expensive, their charging stations are extremely expensive. There's a lot that we would need to improve to go to an electric course. But this can be maybe some baby steps into that ability to have electric buses as part of our fleet. So we gave the superintendent a nod to pretty much have those conversations that he needs to have to look into that potential of bringing some not new electric buses, but getting some on our fleet to see maybe down the road, there'll be more grant money available that they'll expand to districts that maybe have half electric buses versus all electric buses so that we can be part of that reimbursement. And maybe those are steps towards a complete electric bus fleet or not, we don't know. So the good thing about this cautious approach is it gives us lots of time to learn and to go through the course to find out what benefits or hurdles that come with electric busing. So it's a good direction, I think. I mean, I'm not convinced that electric is the right way, but that's just my personal feeling. But I think this approach is really, really good because it's cautious and we can learn from it as we go, as opposed to jumping into something and then trying to figure it out.
So the most, if we, so sorry, just, is it okay if I add?
No, but play all my.
It's just that, you know, if everything goes swimmingly, we would, you know, perhaps 2 or 3 years now, be piloting with a few electric buses. Okay, I don't believe like everything goes swimmingly, we're gonna have a whole fleet of electric buses within 2 or 3 years. Like, you know, we would actually be beginning a pilot at that point.
Right.
And then we're trying to set up the bus bid now, so we're in the game to do that sort of pilot. Okay, but that takes us to
Very baby steps.
yeah, a lot of due diligence, a lot of, you know, partnership with the city, but also with some of the sort of, you know, national grid as a partner, a state agency as another partner that help us do the due diligence to learn. We can't learn on our own.
Just to clarify, because you said kids older electric buses, I think you meant buying some of our low mileage leases like we had talked about.
Yeah, by older diesel buses that
Oh,
can
sorry,
be
diesel,
swapped
and I
out.
said electric and then swap them out for electric down the road. Yes, sorry.
Because people out there listen and say, well, what, there's all this money, what, we don't qualify as of today
Right,
for anything like this.
Right.
Just want to make that clear. If we did, we'd probably be all over it like a bad suit, but we just got it. You know,
Or we qualify and the funding isn't, we technically qualify. But other districts are better, or larger, you know,
Yeah.
higher demand, you know.
it's competitive.
Yeah, to get that, so plays our side on getting it.
and we talked about like renting bays and then we have a mechanic on staff part-time, which I didn't know, I thought the mechanic was gone. So we do have some staff here and we'll need some space to go in that direction down the road as well. But it was a good beginning conversation. See where that goes.
Just have a question, just the CATA, do you say CATA or CATA, do we have any electric buses in that system?
I think there's some hybrids, but then.
Hybrids, okay.
Yeah, or alternatives.
So I'm wondering about leasing, like a few, piloting a program, you need a charging station.
Yeah,
We would have to pay for that too as well?
down the road, if we go there, that's,
I mean,
this
we're
is a
piloting.
very cautious
Yeah.
baby step approach to learn about the electric busing world.
Right, like the
And
cost
if
of
it's
a
something
charging
we do.
station would factor into
Right.
that.
I mean, how do you install them at mailing where we store our buses and how do you secure
Right.
that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
batteries and all kinds of
Environmental
issues.
impacts, is that part of the discussion?
It
as
would
well?
be when we make that decision, whether
Right.
this is the direction we want to go in, absolutely.
5-year-old battery with the bus, is that what you're saying, like 5-year-old bus?
No.
That was like the diesel thing, I was confused about.
Oh.
No, I made the mistake. I said we were gonna buy
Yeah.
5-year-old electric buses. We're buying 5-year-old diesel buses, which we can eventually trade out for
Yeah, the
electric
way the
buses.
grant works now is you need
Yeah.
to have home buses to trade it. Not, who knows what the grant's gonna be like in 5 years. So the thinking is, well, we're not gonna buy a brand new bus, plan to trade it in.
Right.
But if we already have low mileage leases because of COVID, we won't drive any much.
Yeah, we were, at one point, we were hoping to buy our own buses. This is from the leasing company. They already sold those, promised them to other sellers probably last year. We were aware of that, but now we're put out a bid to buy low mileage buses that are probably coming off the leases. And so that's being Gary's helping out that bid.
We also talked about some technology grants that are available, the Emergency Connectivity Fund, and there's 2 parts to that. And correct me if I'm wrong, I was trying to understand this when we were getting the report. 2 different parts to the grant. One of the grants that we're receiving will replace 720 end-of-life Chromebooks that we have here at a cost of $255,600. We're gonna be able to renew 100 cellular Wi-Fi hotspots for another year at a cost of $24,000. From that we're getting reimbursed for this. There's no cost to the district at all. The second part of that grant is it's called E-rate category 2. It will replace all network end of life switching routing equipment for the city and school citywide. And this is where I learned that the city houses a lot of the technology. I mean, the school houses a lot of the technology for the city. So there's a benefit to the whole city as a whole by getting this grant on the school side. And then there's a funding commitment. The remainder of the funding will be coming from IT for certain appropriations for the city, part of that as well. Do you want to add to that? Because I didn't have
Yeah.
a full understanding of it, because Grant was doing all the talking, and Grant talks about this like it's his first language, which it is, and to me, I'm just like, wow, this is a lot of money, a lot of good things coming, but.
No, so this is all, federal dollars, E-rate is a regular occurrence in terms of that. But what the city and schools IT, so the details are up here. So in terms of replacing all the network equipment on city and school side together, it's an $808,000 project. Okay, the E-rate category 2 funding is providing $359,000 of that. And that's what you're approving tonight. Okay, for the grant, and the rest is coming from city funding, city appropriations. But again, it's as we said, a lot of the city's IT infrastructure is actually housed here in the high school, and so it's a joint project.
So I didn't see the motion on our agenda, but I believe we did a motion.
It is.
It is on there?
Yeah, it's
Okay,
under the
sorry.
grants. Do you want to just do those 2 now?
Yeah, so with that being said, there was a motion of the subcommittee to recommend to the full school committee to accept the Emergency Connectivity Fund ECF3 grant in the amount of $279,600. And I so moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, will you roll call vote?
Ms. Weason.
Yes.
Chairperson Clancy.
Yes.
Mr. Melvin.
Yes.
Mr. Minio.
Yes.
Ms. Prince.
Yes.
Mayor Verda.
Yes.
Ms. Watson.
Yes.
And again, there was a recommendation for the school committee, for the subcommittee to the school committee to accept the E-rate category 2 grant in the amount of $359,339.08. And I so moved.
Second.
Discussion? Seeing none? Call vote, please.
Ms. Weason.
Yes.
Chairperson Clancy.
Yes.
Mr. Melvin.
Yes.
Mr. Minio.
Yes.
Ms. Prince.
Yes.
Mayor Verda.
Yes.
And Ms. Watson.
Yes.
Great. We talked about circuit breaker funding. This year, we are getting a little bit less of circuit breaker money. I think it's 250,000 less, even though that does include transportation now. That's part of the Student Opportunity Act, where they added transportation to be part of that. So it's a little bit less, but we're still getting over $1 million, which is good news to report. We approved some transfers. We have a little bit of a cash flow issue because of school equipment that has to be paid for, so we are taking money from, I think, the health insurance account to cover some equipment. However, that money will be put back and reimbursed. It's just transferred for a short amount of time. We are short-staffed in some speech language where we had to pay for services, so we did some transfers out of accounts for that as well. And there is a list of those transfers in the packet of the BNF subcommittee. In addition, we talked about the user fees that got referred to the subcommittee because of the youth charges. We did not come to a conclusion at that meeting. We had a talk, and the administration is going to come back with some potential resolutions to maybe make some changes to those fees so that they're equitable and affordable for our youth groups. In addition, we talked about the budget calendar, which I believe the superintendent is going to report out on, and he's up and ready to do that.
Thank you for your support. So this is a pretty classic calendar. Everyone's been through this, right? Because we're through the spring, so we're already working through budgets and having our budget meetings like we do in late November, early December, with all the school principals and then also our director of the different programs or departments. Then we put together the draft budget based on our priorities, and those will be based on the plan for ongoing improvement, obviously. The first public step is here in blue, when we meet with BNF subcommittee on January 12th, 17th, and 18th. All members are invited to those. And that's where we really lay out the priorities across the departments and districts, and the specifics of how the school and priorities, relate to the plan for ongoing improvement. That leads to the presentation of the district budget on the very first, and then we continue the public process through the public hearing, the school committee vote to submit to the mayor, and the budget, and then the next slide is then the city takes over the process, and the city council reviews the budget, and it's a public hearing on it, and then has a vote to accept it up or down, and then that comes back. Once they approve the budget and the appropriation rather, then it comes back to the school committee for one final vote in June. So that 6-month process is actually almost 8-month process. It's underway.
Felt like it just ended.
If it's the 8-month process, then we have 4 months we're gonna do it, right? So anyway, so that's just so folks know, and we'll keep you apprised of that, and we'll have a lot of meetings on it.
Okay, the committee report is the ad hoc communications meeting from today, November 30th, 2022.
Off the presses.
Hot off the presses, as Ben said, it hasn't met in probably 2 years, so it was a very good meeting. So the first item of business was hearing an update on the Gloucester Public Schools communications efforts. There's a lot of good stuff going on. Some highlights are the Gloucester Public Schools Facebook page is being more regularly updated, it's more current. There's continuous meetings with stakeholders and the communication working group to brainstorm and think about how to improve our communications. And included in that group are communications professionals who have kids in our schools, so really know our schools intimately. A survey has already gone out to families who left Gloucester Public School after 8th grade. So part of a beginning process to really sort of understand why people are leaving, and sort of what we can do about that. There are more regular timely messages to families via email. The communications crew is working well. I guess that's Mike. I'll explain.
There's not 2 of us.
Right, or Mike and Ben, I'll explain who Mike is in a moment, are working on a K-5 intro video to give a sense of our elementary schools, and with a goal of giving that to prospective parents in addition to the rest of the community. And they're also reaching out to parent leaders on how best to reach families that are typically underrepresented in our schools. So we talked about this, and this is obviously ongoing, but those are some of the top line things. Next, been reported on, where we are, how communications looks in our 3-year plan for ongoing improvement. And all of these things are part of that, but the future state, I liked that term, is that the goal is that we're going to be communicating about the work we're doing, great work and the progress and priorities. We're going to become a resource for families and the community on parenting, education, student well-being. And the Lynn Lyons presentation next week is a big, is an example of that, around anxiety in our families. And the goal is sort of one of the goals of this is because we're communicating our accomplishments, both within our schools and within our greater community. All of Gloucester is sort of participating and celebrating and appreciating our students and our staff and our schools. So those are two of the main issues. We met our our community engagement and communications coordinator, Mike Gaffney, who is now working part-time, right? He's full-time, okay. Who is our full-time community engagement and communications coordinator.
Plus,
Is he?
full-time little plus, yeah.
Right. So maybe that's why we haven't had a chance to meet him, but he was vigorously taking notes and listening and hearing suggestions and brainstorming from the committee. And the last order of business was to onboard our new ad hoc communications subcommittee member, Bill Melvin, who's going to be taking over some of the Facebook posting, and that's still in discussion. But we had a useful conversation just going over our social media policy and sort of looking at what we need to strengthen as far as photos, student photos, and how they get on our page. So that is a sort of top line. Does anyone have more questions, or Ben, is there anything? Keith?
I was just wondering about like photographs of students. Is there any consent that needs to be?
Yes, you're a parent. So there is a thing that comes home that says do you give consent?
Like your visits is, you show pictures, I think I've signed something before, but.
No, parents have, and they can change that whenever they want, to the school secretary. But that, we want to make sure that, we're all abiding by that. And then, so just sort of re-looking at making sure that we post on Facebook that it's been, and it has student images on it, that we're only posting images of students who have that, whose family give that. Very important.
So question, so Gloucester Public Schools on Facebook, is there something else besides this public group, of which I'm a member?
Well,
Is there a business page? Like, because this has 660 members, I mean, we really need to up that number, so I don't know if there's another page I'm completely missing. This is the page that has all the latest posts,
so there's also a school committee page.
okay.
Are you not aware? You don't know about this?
I thought this one had replaced it, but okay.
No,
So
there's the Gloucester Public Schools page, and then there's a Gloucester School Committee group. It's not officially a page, it's a group. So that's what we administer or post on.
School committee, or
So there we are.
Okay.
So that's a separate but related Facebook entity.
okay, again, it's a group and you have to join. So
Yep.
this one's at 894, so.
Yep.
Just folks out there, those are the two pages, Gloucester School Committee and Gloucester Public Schools. It's a group you have to ask to join.
You do.
Okay.
You do have to join, but you don't.
And they are updated a lot more than they were in the past. There's no
That's-
question.
That's the goal. Well, this page, the group only started in 2020.
Mhm.
So,
This is our homepage of this website. You can see there are two links here. One, this is for the GPS official one, and then there's also join the school committee group right below it. So
right.
that's from our homepage. They're easy to find both of them. Great.
Need a policy link
Policy link,
to the policy manual.
it's right here. School committee.
It's not,
I couldn't find it the other day.
yes, it takes a little, you can't search it. You can't search it.
Yeah, but it is,
You can't switch quick and then policy manual.
Right,
so it's on the school committee and what?
And then the school, you drop down here.
It's
It's-
not searchable. Yeah,
the policy manual is not. Yeah, so,
No, meaning. If you put in the
You
little,
can't, if you put it in
question mark.
policy manual,
Oh,
it
okay.
doesn't come up.
got it. So let me just make sure I understand. So if I go here,
Type in policy manual or policy
go to
or the word
magnify
manual.
it.
it's on there.
okay, all right, I think I know, yeah, I won't do it live, but I trust it.
Yeah.
I actually understand actually what the issue is there and why that is, and that is more complicated.
okay,
So, but we,
Thank you for bringing that.
just since we're talking policy manual, the social media policy for the public is policy BHEA. Page 105, and that's just the policy that we were discussing and just looking at. Not changing, not altering. That's it.
okay, well, thank you. Okay, moving on to action, we have some other grants to accept. The first one is the Safe and Supportive Schools 335 grant in the amount of $18,696, and I so move we accept it.
Second,
Okay, any discussion? Okay, Maria, roll call vote.
Ms. Weason.
yes.
Chairperson Clancy.
Yes.
Mr. Melvin.
Yes.
Mr. Minio.
Yes.
Ms. Prince.
Yes.
Mayor Verga.
Yes.
Ms. Watson.
Yes.
Second one, I move that we accept targeted assistance 325/222 grant in the amount of 30,000.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Ms. Weason.
Yes.
Chairperson Clancy.
Yes.
Mr. Melvin.
Yes.
Mr. Minio.
Yes.
Ms. Prince.
Yes.
Mayor Verga.
Yes.
Ms. Watson.
Yes.
Okay, and the last one is a group of grants from Gloucester Education Foundation. I move that we accept the following grants from the Gloucester Education Foundation, which is Plumco Theater Program for $2,500, West Paris Theater Program for $3,000, O'Malley Grade 8 Printmaking, $1,600, Pneumatic Compressor System, which is at the Gloucester High School for $15,000, and O'Malley Academy, $10,000.
Second.
Please, you want to expand on any of it?
Yeah, just like two of them, one of the O'Malley grading, printmaking, that is Polycope designers, folks know about the Polycope, legendary Polycope designers. I think two of their printing presses are in existence at this day, at this time. One of them is at O'Malley School. And it's big, large, very huge printing pressings and print, yes, to press. So that's what that supports, that, the work materials for kids to use that. And then the pneumatic compressor system. That sounds odd, I'll explain that one. This is actually a partnership between GF and the schools to get more dollars. So, and I'll explain that. Pneumatic compressor system helps with our shop, but also some of our engineering classes. So it's a sort of dual role. I'm not sure in what way. Okay, but by GF putting in $15,000, the schools from our operational budget putting in $10,000, that's allowed us to access, I think, about $100,000 more from a grant from the state. Okay, because we had to show matching funds and also we were making a contribution. So we couldn't have been able to access a larger grant funding from the state, which will help our GPT programs without and fix this, repair this system, which is used in many classes out the part of GM. So it's very, very helpful. That sort of was a accelerator of dollars for us. That's good.
Any questions on any of those? Maria, roll call vote, please.
Ms. Weason.
Yes.
Chairperson Clancy.
Yes.
Mr. Melvin.
Yes.
Mr. Minio.
Yes.
Ms. Prince.
Yes.
Mayor Verga.
Yes.
And Ms. Watson.
Yes.
Okay, moving on to the East Veterans Elementary School update.
We have to start in time. 8:30. We gave, I think since our last meeting, I gave a full update to the city council. Mayor Verga and I and Kathy Sampson did. One of the most important pieces is that we now have the private funding agreement in place with MSBA, which opens up the avenue for reimbursements to start flowing in, which is great. And we're 60% completed. In terms of just a few things, I would say, I'm not painting the walls, but walls are being painted, the academic A building. The A building is, secure from the elements. And they continue to do things like install the metal panels, the cover panels on the outside of A, continue to do work inside of building B around the roof and electrical and plumbing, and also wallboard and plastering, and so continues at pace and keep on working all the way through the winter because the building can do that now. Windows are coming in and being installed as well. That's more progress, but yeah, it just keeps on going.
The furniture selection, has that been decided?
It's underway.
Yeah.
Amy Pascal's in charge, and I occasionally make suggestions that are ignored. That too. No, Patty Fancy is also, so we have an interior subcommittee, to be serious here at the moment. And so the primary folks in that are Matt Fusco and Amy Pascallo and Patty Fancy, myself, a couple other building members who show on occasion. But we're looking at every single thing you can imagine. Stools, desks for adults, chairs, desks for students, soft seating, all sorts of things if you want to add.
And to back up just a little bit, the Doran Whittier designer who does the furniture and helps us with this particular piece of the project has had 2 different vendors bring furniture.
Yeah, that's what I
right.
remember.
So really, I think what's being chosen has met the approval with a lot of teachers providing and educators providing input. In terms of comfort, in terms of durability.
Getting teacher input, and in some cases, we're saying, will this chair fit a 5th grader and a 3rd grader? And we're actually bringing some tall students and small students and everything in between, and they get to test out the furniture, and they say, I like this chair, I don't like this chair, and give their feedback to be considered. Teachers get to give that feedback. It's really a nice inclusive process. Inclusive process.
I give my feedback, it's ignored. That's all. No problem. No, no, I'm on the committee.
He's on the
No, I need to be paid attention. I know I do that. No, but it's I only have a certain level of interest on certain things.
And it's also a balancing act between cost and durability too. We're not. The decisions have been make sure it's definitely high quality so that it will last, but is it at a good price point? So
What about supply chain?
Yeah.
well, they have definitely built that into this particular process.
Yeah, we're doing it earlier than we normally would.
Okay.
And also, so related supply chains cost obviously, and that's a area where, as Kathy said, it's an area we could easily go quite a bit over because of cost increases, and so we're being very diligent about that. So.
And I assume Grant is probably doing all of his technology pieces because
There's a
there's
technology
also,
committee also.
yeah, so that's happening as well. Because we also get reimbursed for a portion of that from the MSBA. That's, building a school which should have everything in the school. So I don't know anything about that, but I know that's what happens.
And that's down to the level of, in a room, for example, what's the type of connections connection you're making in terms of cords and that stuff. So a teacher who's presented has some flexibility where they're presenting from, and they can actually move through. So anyway, all I'm saying, like, it gets very, very specific. That's the technology piece, is how to make sure that not only the technology, but is it compatible with the way we're instructing. A teacher would use it.
Especially when the rooms can be expanded.
Right, exactly. This is a lot of good one. Other piece is that we have two of our staff members who are acting as administrative interns, Amy Athola and Casey Hubney, and they are, as part of their administrative intern. So this is for them to get administrative certification. So they work in partnership with principals. This is something we do very we are with their own staff to help them sort of advance. They're both going to be helping with the project in terms of transition, already starting the transition to the new building. That might be on developing arrival and dismissal plans. That could be on the packing, moving, that could be on identifying school mascot, things like that. So they're working with our team, working with Matt Fusco and Chris Williams on some of those key transition things as part of leadership development. So that's a nice thing. We need that capacity, and it sort of helps all of us together.
Okay, and for your information in the packet, there is a letter from the superintendent to Senator Tar and State Representative Ferrante. You want to tell them what it's about?
Yeah, so every year, the Operating Service Division of the state's Executive Office of Administration determines what a possible rate increase will be for special education private school tuition. Okay, so out of district placements that go to private schools. Okay, so not, and so they've recommended this year a 14% increase in that tuition. Typically, we're looking at 2% annual give or take. Okay, so I've reached out to Representative Ferrante and Senator Tar to say no, we don't support that, and also helping them understand the financial impact on our operating budget that would be. Okay, so and also other students are reaching out as well. It's special education costs are an ongoing concern, and as it has since it was created, fully funding circuit breaker has always been a concern. Through the Student Opportunity Act, there's been some strides in that, but we want to continue. But that sort of level of increase on private special education private school tuition would be a significant challenge. We can raise that just that one area of special education tuition by upwards of $300,000 above what we would anticipate. So the school students association is working with the legislature in the central office.
I have one item to refer to the Building and Finance Subcommittee, which is going through the process by which we name the playground at East Adams Elementary School. So the school committee does it formally, takes the vote, right?
But to reconfirm.
To reconfirm,
I don't want to get the impression we're changing.
reconfirm so that we've gone through the process to make the vote, make it official.
Yeah.
So that there's no confusion in the community that it's been taken care of. It's
And
gonna
then we'll continue to recognize and honor Sergeant, private majors. Yeah.
And the rock at the top of the hill is there to represent that.
Yeah. And then that's, staying there, always has, always will be.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right.
One question for Ben. We're after Thanksgiving, so can you give us the update on the Beaman Playground, please?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. I have no pictures yet.
Yeah.
But someone does. But I don't have. The Beaman Playground is the original, the one that's been there for I'm not sure how long, has been dismantled and removed.
Gaga pit still there?
Gaga pit, they haven't been allowed in a while.
Huh?
That Gaga pit, they've had to keep the kids out.
It's a ball.
So-
Like
It's been there, but they haven't been allowed it all year.
Oh, yeah. Okay, good.
And the equipment has already arrived. Equipment's there. The old one is dismantled, and we'll begin the same process of our partner company Greenice will do the earth moving and preparing of the soil, so to speak. And then Compan. Gary, is it Compan?
Yes.
Yep, Compan, our equipment provider will do installation. And we expect, if all things goes according to plan and it stops raining or the snow, that kids will be playing on the playground before summer vacation.
Just to be.
I said
That would
before.
be, that would be great.
Yeah, that's, I mean,
Holiday gift.
schedules can get waylaid, but we expect it and the schedule says that it'll be there before.
We've been waiting a long time for this.
I saw Amanda Pollock,
Yes.
PTO, happened to run into her yesterday, I think it was. And she, as she should be, she's really happy and pleased and proud. Because she has been a stalwart supporting us for a long time, so
Done a lot of research.
a lot of work. She's done a lot of work on it. As Gary Frisch also has, and other folks do, but Amanda Pollock, I really appreciate her leadership on this.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay,
We'll have pictures next time.
great.
So that concludes the regular part of our meeting. We will be going into executive session for the following purposes, and we will return to open session only to adjourn. First purpose is to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with Transportation Teamsters Union. Number two, to discuss litigation strategy. Number three, to discuss facilities planning as it may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the school committee. And so,
Second.
roll call vote, Maria?
Ms. Weason,
Yes.
Chairperson Clancy.
Yes.
Mr. Melvin.
Yes.
Mr. Minio.
Yes.
Ms. Prince.
Yes.
Mayor Verda.
Yes.
Ms. Watson.
Okay. Good night, everyone.